Tonight we're venturing deep into the forgotten corners of Texas, where dust covers broken doorways, wind whispers through hollow halls, and not everyone who enters an abandoned house comes out the same. These are 20 true stories from people who dared to spend the night in Texas homes that should have stayed empty, places that hold more than memories, and walls that sometimes whisper back. But before we begin, there's something most people forget. They listen to the stories, feel the chill down their spine, and then they leave without subscribing. By doing that, they miss the darkness that comes next, the stories that only the brave dare to hear. Don't make that mistake. Hit subscribe right now, because once we start, you'll want the lights off, the volume high, and no one else around. So tell me, where are you watching from and what time is it there? Drop it in the comments, because tonight, across this vast and haunted land, the houses of Texas aren't as empty as they seem. Now, let's step inside. It was supposed to be a dumb internet stunt, something quick and creepy for their YouTube channel before heading back to campus. Ryan and Lucas were both juniors at Texas A&M Corpus Christi, running a small channel called Night Hike. They did overnight challenges, abandoned places, ghost towns, standard college horror bait. But the old house off FM 666 wasn't just another ruin. Locals near Mathis called it the Bledsoe Place, though nobody could remember if that was ever its real name. They said the man who owned it used to raise horses until a fire took most of the barn and part of the house back in the 80s. Since then, it sat behind a rusted gate and a line of mesquite trees, a pale skeletal shape against the brushland. They'd found it on Google Earth, nothing but a shadow off the farm road south of town. Ryan drove them out there just before sundown. The back of his old Tacoma loaded with camera gear, flashlights, a few Red Bulls, and one too many jokes about getting possessed by a drywall demon. The air was warm and still. No wind, just the smell of dust and distant rain. They parked on the shoulder where the gravel shoulder met the high grass and walked up the dirt path, with the cameras already rolling. The house looked worse up close. Long collapsed porch siding eaten through by weather, a broken window where curtains still clung like cobwebs. The door hung half open. Inside, the smell was awful, like wet plaster and mice. Their light swept across yellowed wallpaper and wrought black beams. In the back of the living room, there was a staircase that led nowhere. Half the upper floor had fallen through years ago. Ryan filmed everything with his shoulder-mounted rig, narrating in that cheerful YouTuber tone he always used. We're here at the legendary Bledsoe Ranch House, rumored to be haunted since the 1980s fire. Locals say you can still hear footsteps upstairs and see light through the walls. Tonight we're doing a full overnight challenge, no leaving, no edits. Lucas grinned for the camera, holding up his phone. If anything moves, it's probably a raccoon. Or Ryan crying. They set up their sleeping bags in what used to be the living room right beside a half-collapsed wall. There was something odd about that wall. It had been sealed with newer drywall than the rest of the house, cleaner, smoother, as if someone had patched it in after the fire. Ryan noticed it and joked, "That's where the bodies are." They spent the next hour doing B-roll shots, doors creaking, flashlight sweeps, close-ups of dead rats and broken furniture. Around 11 p.m., the wind picked up, making the whole house groan. Ryan mounted his camera on a tripod aimed toward the sealed wall. They sat across from it eating chips, talking nonsense about ghosts and sponsorships. Then at 11:37 came the first knock. 3 short taps, hollow and deliberate, from behind the drywall. Both of them froze. Lucas laughed nervously and said, "Okay, that's a raccoon, right?" Ryan said nothing. He checked the wall with his flashlight. The paint looked normal, white and smooth, no holes or cracks. He tapped back, one single knock, silence. Then, after a pause, the same 3 taps returned. Ryan's camera caught everything. You can hear him whisper, "It's inside the wall." They thought maybe an animal had gotten trapped behind it. Lucas tried to lighten the mood, saying they'd go viral if they broke it open live on stream. So he grabbed the small hammer from his pack, aimed it, and knocked a small hole near the floor. The sound that came out wasn't what either of them expected. It wasn't an animal. It was breathing. Slow, heavy, wet-sounding breaths right behind the hole. Lucas dropped the hammer. Ryan kept filming, whispering, "Oh, dude, get back." The breathing stopped suddenly. Then the drywall bulged outward, just a small swell, like something pressed against it from the other side. The camera shook as Ryan stepped back, whispering that they should get out. But Lucas, nervous laugh shaking his voice, said, "It's probably air pressure from the wind." He knelt, peering through the hole. "There's space back there," he said, shining his phone light through. "It's hollow, like a crawl space or something." Ryan's camera caught it, Lucas pressing his face close, squinting. You can hear him mutter, "Wait, there's something moving," before he jerked back, gasping. He said something touched his face from inside the wall. His cheek had a faint white smear like chalk dust, but colder, clammy. He said it felt like fingers. They decided to pack up right then, but when Ryan checked his phone, there was no signal. Lucas said his was dead too. Battery's fine, but no service. They agreed to wait until daylight. Ryan aimed the tripod camera back at the wall and left it recording, while they sat near the front doorway whispering. At around 2 a.m., the camera caught the second knock. This time it wasn't rhythmic. It was dragging, scratching, like nails tracing the inside of the drywall. Then came a long, deep thump as if something large leaned against it. The sheetrock cracked slightly near the hole Lucas had made. Ryan whispered, "It's trying to get through." The footage shows him crawling closer, shining his light across the surface. The wall pulsed once, softly like a heartbeat. He told Lucas to get their stuff. Lucas's flashlight beam swept the ceiling, the doorways, until he stopped moving. Ryan turned back to ask what was wrong. The light was trembling in Lucas's hand, aimed at the floor behind Ryan. "There's someone in the hallway," he said. Ryan turned, and for one frame the camera caught it, a shape at the end of the hall, tall and gray with what looked like a burlap sack over its head. It wasn't moving, but its outline was blurred, wrong, like a smudge on the lens that wouldn't stay still. Ryan shouted and swung the light toward it, but the figure vanished. The camera's audio spiked with static. They ran for the door, but it wouldn't open. The hinges screamed, the knob rattled, but it was like something was holding it shut from the other side. Behind them, the scratching turned violent, a ripping noise followed by dry, heavy thuds. The hole Lucas had made widened, dust spilling out, and something dark pressed forward. You can hear Ryan whispering, "Please open. Please open." And then a sound that doesn't belong in any human throat, a choking, dragging gasp, followed by words that almost form, "Stay." The last footage shows Ryan forcing the window open and climbing out into the night. Lucas never followed. The camera dropped on its side, showing Ryan running toward the road, shouting his friend's name. Then the frame goes black. When sheriff's deputies found the camera 2 days later, it was lying near the gate, still recording but corrupted. The lens was cracked, the file half missing. They found Ryan in a motel near Corpus Christi, half delirious, refusing to speak about what happened. He said only that it lives in the walls. The house was demolished a few months later after a small brush fire spread through the property. But according to the contractor who ran the bulldozer, when the machine tore through what remained of the living room wall, there was a gap inside about the width of a man, sealed perfectly on both sides with old plaster. And inside that gap, under layers of dust, they found a single human jawbone still wet, as if it hadn't been there long. When I first moved to Jefferson, Texas, I wasn't looking for anything fancy, just a quiet place to stay while I worked nights at the long-term care home on Polk Street. The Victorian house on East Lafayette looked a little worn down, but it had a certain warmth that the newer apartments lacked. Mrs. Harrell, the landlady, was an elderly widow who kept the place tidy, always burning lavender candles that made the halls smell faintly like church pews. She rented out the upstairs rooms to nurses and teachers mostly. Women she said she trusted. I took the one at the end of the hall, just past a narrow door she told me not to worry about. The locked nursery. The first night I noticed it, I thought it was just my imagination. A soft clicking sound, like an old radio being tuned, came through the wall near my bed. I brushed it off, telling myself it was the pipes or the air unit kicking in. But then I realized it had a pattern, rhythmic and faintly static, followed by the low crackle of a baby monitor. It was a sound I recognized too well from years of night shifts, the subtle hiss of white noise before a voice or a cry. Only there hadn't been a baby in that house for decades. The next morning, I mentioned it casually over coffee. Mrs. Harrell froze with her cup halfway to her mouth and said, "You must have been half asleep, dear. There's no baby monitor here. That nursery's been locked since my daughter passed." She said it calmly, but with the tight smile of someone shutting a door on a memory. I apologized, changed the subject, and let it go. That night I worked a double, came home just before sunrise, and collapsed into bed. I woke up around 9 in the morning to the same static hum, this time closer, sharper. I followed the sound to the thin wall by the locked door. The noise faded as I got closer, then went silent entirely, like it knew I was listening. When I pressed my ear against the wood, I could have sworn I heard faint breathing on the other side. By the end of the week, the pattern had become familiar. The monitor clicking on between 2 and 3 in the morning, soft coos or hiccups echoing faintly through the plaster. Once I thought I heard a lullaby, a woman's voice singing low and sweet, though the words were slurred and distant. I started leaving my own bedside lamp on, telling myself it was just nerves, but the glow only made the shadows around the nursery door look deeper. One evening, after a particularly long shift, I came home to find the hallway lights dimmed and the smell of baby powder in the air. Mrs. Harrell's door downstairs was closed, and the rest of the house was silent. As I passed the nursery door, I heard something knock softly from inside. 3 small knocks. I froze. Then the faint creak of a rocking chair followed. I backed away and went straight to my room, leaving the light on all night. The next morning, I couldn't resist. While Mrs. Harrell was in town, I tried the nursery door again. It was locked tight, brass knob cold to the touch, but the keyhole was just wide enough to see through. Inside was darkness and a faint movement like curtains swaying. Then, for half a second, something pale drifted past the crack. Something that looked like a small hand pressing against glass from the inside. I stepped back so fast I nearly tripped over my shoes. That evening, Mrs. Harrell caught me looking toward the door again and said quietly, "You shouldn't pry. That room's not for you." Her tone wasn't angry, it was sad. I wanted to ask her more, but the words died in my throat. A few nights later, during a storm, the baby monitor turned on louder than ever before. It wasn't coming through the wall anymore. It was inside my room. The sound was so sharp it made my skin prickle. I turned on the lamp and looked around, half expecting to find an actual device. But there was nothing. Then out of the static came a soft cry, unmistakable, real, and close. I pressed my hand against the wall again, and this time the sound of crying stopped instantly. Then beneath my palm I felt a vibration, steady and pulsing like a heartbeat coming from inside the wall. I yanked my hand back and ran to Mrs. Harrell's door, pounding until she opened it in her robe. I stammered out what I'd heard, expecting her to laugh it off or call me crazy. Instead, she just sighed and said, "You're hearing her again. It happens sometimes when the air gets heavy." My daughter used to leave the monitor on even after. She trailed off and didn't finish. I asked what happened, but she shook her head and went back inside. The rest of the night, I sat in the kitchen with every light on, listening to the faint crackle that seemed to come from every wall at once. The following evening, I came home early from work. The house was quiet, too quiet. The lavender scent was gone, replaced by that same faint baby powder smell. The hallway light flickered as I climbed the stairs. When I reached the top, the nursery door stood slightly open for the first time. I hesitated, calling softly, "Mrs. Harrell?" No answer. I pushed the door wider, the hinges crying out. Inside, moonlight spilled across a faded crib and a rocking chair that moved gently on its own. Dust floated in the air like drifting ash. On the floor beside the crib lay an old baby monitor, its red light glowing faintly even though it wasn't plugged in. I knelt to pick it up, and as soon as I touched it, the speaker hissed alive with static. A woman's voice whispered through it, soft, broken, almost pleading. "She's still asleep. Don't wake her." I froze. The air grew cold enough to see my breath. From inside the crib came a faint rustle, the sound of fabric shifting. Then the monitor hissed again and the voice said, clearer this time, "You shouldn't be here." I stumbled back, knocking into the doorframe, and the monitor went dead. The room fell silent except for the creaking of the rocking chair, which hadn't stopped moving. I ran downstairs, heart slamming against my ribs, and nearly collided with Mrs. Harrell in the hallway. She looked pale, her eyes red like she'd been crying. Without a word, she locked the nursery door again, slipped the key into her pocket, and said, "You'll have to move out by the end of the week." I can't have this start again. I didn't argue. I packed that night, but before I left, I noticed something strange. On my nightstand sat the baby monitor, the same one I'd seen in the nursery, though I had left it behind. Its light was blinking slowly. I picked it up, trembling, and pressed the button on the side. Static filled the room, followed by the faintest sound of a baby's laugh. I dropped it, bolted down the stairs, and didn't look back. Months later, I saw the listing for the house again. The same room available, same pleasant description about Victorian charm. I almost called just to warn whoever took it next. But I didn't. Some things in Jefferson stay buried where they are, behind locked doors, behind walls that remember every sound. And sometimes when the night is quiet and the wind passes through the trees just right, I swear I still hear that monitor click on, followed by the soft lullaby of someone who never really left. When I first saw the house, I thought it looked like a forgotten photograph someone had left in the sun too long. The limestone walls were the color of bone, streaked with old rain and patches of dark moss. It stood a few miles outside Blanco, on a road that used to lead to an old quarry surrounded by nothing but dry mesquite and the hollow sound of wind sliding through the grass. I had been hitching rides across Texas for 3 weeks, taking whatever day work I could find, and by the time I reached that house, I was running low on money, food, and luck. The owner had been dead for years, or at least that's what the woman at the gas station told me. She said the place had belonged to a retired stonemason named Culver, who dug his own well back in the 50s and swore the water came from deeper than any map could chart. When he died, nobody claimed the property and it sat empty, except for the occasional drifter or hunter who needed a place to rest. The woman laughed when I said I might stay there for the night, told me the only thing left alive in that house was the well. I laughed back, but she didn't. By the time I walked the 3 miles to reach it, dusk had dropped like a curtain. The air was warm but heavy, and crickets pulsed through the weeds. I pushed the warped front door open and found the place mostly bare. Just dust, a few broken chairs, and the smell of limestone and rot. The floorboards were uneven and soft under my boots. In the corner of what had been the living room, there was a fireplace stuffed with old newspapers from the 70s. I found a lantern by the door and was surprised when it still had a little kerosene in it. I struck a match, lit the wick, and watched the light breathe against the walls. It wasn't a bad place to sleep, at least not compared to the highway rest stops I'd been using. Out back, behind a tangle of brittle weeds and fallen fence posts, was the well. It rose from the ground like a gray throat, the stones rough and uneven. The wooden cover had long since rotted away, and a thick rope hung from a pulley over the mouth, frayed at the end where a bucket must have once been. When I leaned over the edge, I couldn't see a thing. Not even a glint of water. I dropped a small stone down, but it never made a sound. That silence went straight through me. The kind that feels like the air itself is holding its breath. I pulled back quickly and told myself I was just tired. Wells go dry, that's all. I went back inside, spread my jacket over the floor, and settled near the fireplace. I must have drifted off sometime around midnight. When I woke, it was to the sound of something wooden creaking outside. At first, I thought it was the wind tugging at the barn door, but the rhythm was too steady. A slow, drawn-out groan, followed by a pause, then another. It sounded like a rope straining under weight. I sat up, holding my breath. The lantern had gone out, and the only light came from the gray edge of the moon spilling through a broken window. The sound came again, clear and deliberate this time, from the direction of the well. I told myself it was nothing, just an old beam, maybe a loose shutter. But when I stood, I could feel that same cold silence pressing against the house. The crickets had gone quiet. Even the wind had stopped. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The beam sliced through the darkness, catching dust and bits of grass in the air. The creaking was louder now, a dry, drawn-out whine of rope sliding against metal. I aimed the light toward the well, and the beam found it immediately. The rope was moving. It was jerking slightly, the pulley turning with a faint metallic squeal. The end of the rope was taut, hanging over the mouth of the well as if someone below were pulling it down. My first thought was that an animal had gotten tangled, or maybe there was a loose mechanism catching in the wind, but then I realized there was no wind. The air was dead still. The rope kept moving, inch by inch, like something was climbing up or lowering itself deeper. The motion stopped as soon as I took a step closer. I shone the light directly into the well, but the beam vanished into pure black. The smell that came out wasn't like earth or damp stone. It was faint but sour, almost metallic, like rusted blood. I backed away slowly, watching the rope sway once more, gently, as if something down there had let go. Back inside, I sat with my back against the wall until dawn. The light through the window finally came, pale and weak. painting the walls in silver dust. I went back out to the well. The rope hung perfectly still now, coiled once around the stones, dry as bone. When I touched it, it felt cold, almost wet, even though the morning air was already warming up. I told myself again it had to be my imagination, a trick of exhaustion and nerves. I'd been walking too long, eating too little. I needed rest, so I stayed. I cooked some beans over a small fire in the hearth and spent the afternoon wandering the edge of the property. The land stretched flat and empty, the hills in the distance like faded blue paper. The nearest sign of life was a single mailbox a half-mile down the road, leaning sideways. I remember thinking how quiet it was out there. No cars, no voices, just the faint ticking of insects in the grass. It should have been peaceful, but it wasn't. That silence carried a pressure like standing too close to a speaker that isn't turned on. As dusk came again, the shadows pooled early. I sat by the window listening. When the first creak came, it was softer than before, almost tentative. A slow pull, then another. The same rhythm. I felt something in my stomach tighten. I took the flashlight again, but this time I didn't go out right away. I waited, counting the intervals between sounds. They were almost even, like the pacing of someone working a crank. I finally forced myself to open the door. The night outside was black, the kind of black that makes the stars look sharp and close. The rope was moving again, steady this time, and I could hear something faint underneath the creak. A dull scraping sound like stone grinding against stone. My light trembled across the well. The rope was lifting slightly now, as if pulling up something heavy. Then it stopped halfway and went limp. The scraping stopped too. I waited, frozen, until I thought I saw movement down in the dark. Something shifting just beyond the circle of light. Then a sound came up, soft but clear, and a breath. Not mine, not the wind. A low, rasping exhale that rose from the bottom and died at the rim of the well. I dropped the flashlight. It clattered against the stones, beams spinning wildly before dying. I ran back inside and barred the door. I didn't sleep at all. The sounds outside continued off and on through the night. Sometimes the rope would creak once, sharply, then nothing for long minutes, then again slow and dragging. Just before dawn, the sound stopped completely. When I finally opened the door, the rope was gone. Only a few frayed strands hung from the pulley. I leaned over, careful not to get too close, and shone the lantern down. There was movement, but not from below. The inside walls of the well were streaked with dark, wet trails, as if something had been pulled up along them. At the base, far below, I saw a faint shape, not round like a bucket, but narrow, slumped. I stepped back, heart hammering. I didn't look again. I packed my things and started down the road toward Blanco, not caring that it was barely light. I made it about a mile before I saw the figure. He stood by the roadside, not moving, near a patch of dead grass. At first I thought it was a scarecrow. The shape was stiff, shoulders square, head tilted down. But when I got closer, I saw his clothes were soaked, hanging heavy. His skin was pale and puckered like someone who'd been underwater too long. He was barefoot, and his eyes, when he finally lifted his head, were white and filmed over. The skin around them was torn, as if scraped raw. I froze. He didn't move toward me, didn't speak. Just stared, mouth slightly open, and I swear I heard the faint sound of a rope creaking somewhere behind him, though there was nothing but empty field. I backed away step by step until I could turn and run. I didn't look back. When I reached the gas station in town, the woman behind the counter went pale as soon as she saw me. She asked where I'd spent the night, and when I told her, she crossed herself. Said I shouldn't have gone near that place. Said old Culver hadn't just died there. He'd hung himself down that very well. Tied a rope to the beam and dropped in. They never found the body, just the frayed end of rope. I didn't tell her what I'd seen. I just asked for the next bus heading anywhere north. When I left town, I looked out the window once, and for a second I thought I saw the outline of that house far off in the fields. The pale stones shining faintly in the morning sun. I swear I saw something hanging over the edge of the well, swaying gently in the wind that wasn't blowing. I never went back. But sometimes, when the night is quiet enough and the air feels heavy, I still hear that sound, slow, dry, deliberate. The creak of a rope pulling against something unseen, working its way up from the dark. In Bastrop, there's a narrow 2-lane road that runs out past the river and into the pine woods, where the asphalt begins to crumble and the telephone poles lean like tired sentinels. Everyone around town knows the old Haynes place sits at the end of that road. The house has been abandoned since the late 80s. And yet every night as the sun goes down, the porch light flickers to life. Some nights it's steady, some nights it wavers like a dying candle, but it always burns, and then vanishes again before dawn. The thing is, the house hasn't had electricity for decades. The meter was pulled and the lines were cut after a fire in the kitchen destroyed half the back wall. Still, people swear the light glows. Hunters, delivery drivers, even a sheriff's deputy once said he saw it when he was parked by the fence line. Nobody goes near it anymore except kids on dares, and most of them come running back before the gate even creaks open. But one kid didn't. His name was Ben Morales, a senior at Bastrop High, the kind of kid who laughed when other people got scared. He was 16, lanky, with the kind of arrogance that comes from never having anything truly bad happen to you. One night in late October, after hearing the porch light story again at a bonfire by the river, he said he was done with the ghost tales and was going to spend the whole night there. He wanted to prove to everyone that the light wasn't real, that it was some old battery lantern or some trick of distant headlights on Highway 71. His friends tried to talk him out of it, but once someone handed him a flashlight and a sleeping bag, it was settled. He set out around 9:30. The moon was a thin slice, barely enough to light the dirt road past the river bridge. The Haynes house sat behind a rusted gate covered in vines, the wood fence long since fallen in spots. When he reached the gate, he saw the porch through the pines just faintly lit. It wasn't a steady yellow glow like a bulb. It was a sickly greenish-white pulse, like light under murky water. He laughed at first, thinking maybe someone had rigged up a motion sensor. He hopped the fence, the chain rattling softly in the cool night air. The closer he got, the quieter it seemed. Crickets stopped, wind died, even the faint hum of the distant highway faded. He noticed his own footsteps sounded too sharp on the cracked gravel path leading up to the porch. The house loomed, its roof sagging in the middle, shutters hanging off, door half ajar. The porch boards looked gray and soft, but when he stepped on them, they held. The light was definitely coming from the old bulb above the front door. It glowed faintly behind a layer of grime and spider webs. He reached up with a grin and tapped it. It didn't flicker. He felt a faint vibration under his fingers like static and pulled back. He took out his phone, filming as he talked. All right, here we are. The legendary haunted porch light. Still on even though there's no power. Maybe it's ghosts, maybe it's solar power, who knows? He turned the camera toward the yard, then back to the bulb. Let's see if this thing's even wired. He climbed up on a porch chair and unscrewed the bulb. It didn't go dark. The glass was cold, and when he pulled it free, the light stayed hovering inside the socket, a glowing haze that pulsed faintly. The phone footage shows his face drop for a moment before he muttered, "What the hell?" Then the video cuts off. Nobody saw him again until the next morning. His friends drove out there at sunrise, half expecting to find him asleep on the porch steps. The light was gone. The house looked normal again, if you can call a rotting farmhouse normal. His sleeping bag was spread out by the wall, his flashlight on the ground, still on. His phone was on the porch rail, screen cracked, showing only a few seconds of static before shutting off. The sheriff's department searched the woods, the well, even dredged the nearby creek. They never found him. The story might have died like all the others if not for what happened after. The following night, the porch light came back on. Only this time, people said they saw a shadow moving in front of it, pacing slowly behind the thin lace curtains of the front window. The power company checked the old lines and confirmed again there was no current running to the property. Someone from the county supposedly cut the pole down altogether, yet the light still comes on. Some nights, when the fog rolls off the river and drifts through those woods, you can see it from the highway. It flickers faintly, like someone walking past it over and over. Locals say if you stand at the gate too long, you'll hear a faint knocking from inside the house like a light tapping on glass. And if you're foolish enough to step closer, the light grows brighter, almost welcoming. The sheriff keeps a patrol car near the road on weekends now, just to keep kids from going out there. Years later, when the property was finally sold to a contractor planning to clear the lot, the crew refused to stay after dark. The foreman said the first night they parked their trucks by the fence, the light came on before they even reached the porch. One of his men swore he saw someone standing just beyond it, half in shadow, wearing a hoodie and jeans. When they shined their lights, the figure stepped back into the doorway and disappeared. They packed up and left. The contractor called the sheriff himself. The deputy on call that night said he'd heard the same stories growing up, but figured he'd check it anyway. He drove out around 9, parked by the gate, and sat there watching. Sure enough, around 10, the light came on. He turned his spotlight on the house, but it didn't fade. He walked halfway up the path, radio crackling softly on his belt. He said it wasn't just light, it was like a low hum, deep enough to feel in your chest. He turned to look back at his cruiser, and in that instant, the porch light went out. When he faced the house again, it came back on, brighter, and this time he saw what looked like a person sitting on the porch swing, facing the door. The shape was motionless. When he shouted, the swing began to move. The deputy swore under oath, later that he heard a voice, faint but clear, whispering something he couldn't make out. He said it wasn't coming from the house but from the ground itself, like it was vibrating up through his boots. He left his flashlight lying in the dirt and ran back to his car. The dash cam footage from that night cuts out at exactly the moment the porch light flares, flooding the lens with a blinding glow before vanishing. A few months later, the house burned down. Fire investigators never found a cause, though they said the blaze started near the porch. The ground there was scorched black, but the bulb, melted and half buried in ash, was found intact, faintly glowing when they dug it out. They stored it in evidence, and a week later, the county building where it was kept had an electrical fire. Nobody was hurt, but the evidence locker was destroyed. Now it's just a patch of overgrown field, but people still say that if you drive past the old Haynes property after dark, you'll see a faint light flickering just above the grass line exactly where the porch once stood. Sometimes it's steady, sometimes it wavers, but always, if you stop long enough, you can swear there's a shadow crossing in front of it, moving back and forth, as if pacing. Locals say that's Ben, still trying to prove the light was fake, still trying to find the switch that never existed. They say the porch light in Bastrop never truly died, and maybe it never will. It was supposed to be a simple drive from Corpus Christi to San Antonio, just another long stretch of rural highway through brush and farmland. But the storm came in faster than the forecast said it would. The kind of Texas thunderstorm that rolls in with a low, dark belly and turns daylight into the color of old bruises. By the time I reached the turnoff near Goliad, the rain was coming down in thick, slanting sheets, and the wipers on my truck were useless. I could barely see the white line of the shoulder. When lightning split the sky, I caught sight of a dirt road leading off into the trees and a sagging mailbox leaning out of the mud. I made the turn without thinking, desperate to get out of the storm before the wind pushed me into a ditch. The road was more mud than gravel, and the truck slid and fishtailed as I drove deeper in. It must have been half a mile before I saw the house. It sat back from the road, half hidden by live oaks, its roof caved in at one end, boards dark with rot. The windows looked like they had cataracts filmed over by dust and rain. It wasn't welcoming, but it was shelter. I parked under a pecan tree, grabbed my duffel and flashlight, and made a run for the porch. The rain hit like thrown gravel, stinging my face. The porch boards creaked under my boots, soft and spongy with rot. The front door was already cracked open, hanging on one hinge. I pushed it with my shoulder, and it gave way with a groan. Inside, it smelled of wet wood and dust, the air stale like a cellar. I swung the flashlight beam across the room. Old furniture covered with sheets, a collapsed staircase, a brick fireplace stuffed with fallen branches. Everything looked like it had been abandoned for decades. The rain hit the roof in deafening waves, and thunder rattled the windows. I set my bag down and found a relatively dry corner near the fireplace. My phone had no signal, of course. I checked my watch, just past 9. The storm wasn't letting up, and I figured I'd wait it out. I pulled an old chair out from under a sheet and sat by the window. The glass was filthy, streaked with rain and spiderwebs, but I could just make out my truck's headlights reflecting faintly through the trees. I tried to distract myself by scrolling through my phone gallery, but the battery was low, so I shut it off and listened to the rain instead. The sound was rhythmic, almost hypnotic, until I realized there was another sound mixed in. A soft, irregular tapping. At first, I thought it was just branches brushing the window, but it came again. 3 slow knocks, then silence. Then 2 more. Not random, not like the wind. It was deliberate, measured. I stood up and aimed the flashlight at the window. The glass was fogged, rain sliding down in streams, but I saw no branches near it. The nearest tree was a good 20 feet from the house. Another knock came, sharper this time. My skin went cold. I told myself it was probably hail, though I knew the sound of hail. I walked closer, squinting to see through the foggy pane. Lightning flashed, white and violent, and for an instant, I thought I saw the outline of a hand pressed against the other side of the glass. I jumped back so fast the chair toppled behind me. When the thunder rolled, the window was empty again, just rain and darkness. I laughed to calm myself, but it came out shaky. Maybe it was my reflection. Maybe water streaks had made it look that way. I picked up the chair, sat again, and tried to ignore the sound. But it didn't stop. The knocking came again, steady this time. 3 knocks, then 2, then 1. A rhythm that felt purposeful, like someone trying to get my attention. I looked for anything that could be hitting the window from outside, maybe debris blown by the wind. But the trees weren't even swaying much anymore. The storm was moving on. The thunder faded, the rain eased to a drizzle, and still the knocking continued. It was quieter now, almost polite, like someone testing if I'd answer. I stood, flashlight shaking slightly in my hand, and stepped toward the window. The beam caught dust and raindrops in the air. My reflection looked pale and strained. I reached out and touched the glass. It was ice cold, colder than it should have been. Then from the other side, something tapped back. I yanked my hand away and stumbled backward, heart hammering. My flashlight flickered. The tapping continued, 3 slow knocks, then silence. The sound wasn't coming from outside anymore. It was deeper, muffled, like it was inside the wall. I pressed my ear to the plaster beside the window and heard a faint, hollow echo. Then something scraped, slow and dragging, down inside the wall cavity. That was enough. I grabbed my bag and went for the door, but the storm had picked up again. Wind howling, rain slashing sideways. The porch was a waterfall. My truck was a blur of headlights through the sheets of rain. I hesitated, debating whether to risk running for it when I heard something else. The sound of movement behind me. It was subtle, just a floorboard sighing under weight, but I knew I hadn't moved. The beam of my flashlight swung across the room, lighting up the furniture and peeling wallpaper. Nothing. Just the sound of rain and my pulse pounding in my ears. I took a step toward the door when the knock came again, this time from the opposite side of the room. The window on the far wall rattled violently, like someone was pounding on it from outside. Then it stopped. Silence, thick and waiting. Lightning flashed again, flooding the room in white for an instant. I saw it then, a shape standing just beyond the far window, close enough that its face almost touched the glass. But there was no face, just a smear of darkness where it should have been. The moment the light faded, it was gone. I didn't wait. I ran through the doorway out into the rain. The mud swallowed my boots and I nearly fell before reaching the truck. I fumbled with the keys, hands shaking, and finally got inside. I locked the doors, started the engine, and slammed the headlights on. The house loomed through the rain, crooked and hollow, one window faintly lit by my beam. Something moved behind the glass. A pale hand, just visible, rose and pressed against it. Then slowly the hand curled into a fist and knocked. Once, twice, 3 times. I floored the gas. The tires spun mud and gravel before finding traction. The house vanished behind me as I sped down the dirt road, heart hammering so hard I thought I'd pass out. When I reached the highway, the rain stopped entirely. The night was calm, clear, the kind of silence that feels staged. I drove another 30 miles before I stopped at a gas station. The clerk looked up when I came in, drenched and shaking. I told him I'd taken a wrong turn in the storm and asked if there were any old houses off that road near Goliad. He frowned and said there used to be one, but it burned down sometime in the 70s. I told him I'd seen it. He just stared, confused, and said, "Son, that place hasn't been standing for 50 years. I drove the rest of the way to San Antonio without stopping again. I don't take back roads anymore, not at night, not even when it rains. Because sometimes when the thunder starts rolling and I'm near a window, I swear I can still hear it. 3 knocks, slow and steady, waiting for me to answer. The town of Marfa always had that low hum of mystery about it. A place where the desert stretched out so far it began to look like the sky had swallowed the earth. I'd come out there chasing what everyone else did, the Marfa lights. I'd seen shaky videos online, Read theories ranging from ghosts to headlights to something that didn't belong to this world. As a photographer, I wanted to see for myself, not just watch from the roadside like most tourists. I rented a small ranch house about 8 miles south of town, a squat, sun-bleached structure surrounded by mesquite and silence. The owner said it hadn't been used much since her husband died a decade ago. She gave me the keys and told me to watch for snakes in the attic if I went up there. I laughed at that. I shouldn't have. The first night was dry, cold, and perfectly still. I set up my tripod outside near the porch, the kind of silence that eats sound alive, pressing in from every direction. The stars out there didn't blink, they burned. I could see more of them than I ever had in my life. My camera clicked every few seconds as I adjusted focus, scanning the horizon for any strange flickers. After about an hour, I saw it. Not through the viewfinder, just naked eye. A pale orb hovering low over the scrubland. It wasn't bright like a headlight. It pulsed as though breathing, a soft white glow with edges that bled into the night. I stared at it too long, half forgetting I was supposed to capture it. The thing drifted sideways, then simply went out, as if someone had blown it out like a candle. I checked the camera playback, heart thumping. I caught it. One frame, faint but unmistakable. I stayed up late going through shots, windows open to let in the desert air. It smelled like dust and old wood. Around 2 a.m. I heard a noise above me, something dragging. The attic. I told myself it was wind scraping across the shingles, but there wasn't wind. I paused the camera review and listened. The noise came again, slow and deliberate, as if something heavy was being pulled across boards. Then silence. I tried to ignore it, told myself I was just keyed up. The next day I bought water and canned food from the gas station in town. The cashier, a wiry old man with skin like leather, asked where I was staying. When I told him about the ranch, his face tightened. "You're better off shooting from the viewing area," he said. "That place ain't good after dark." When I asked what he meant, he just muttered something about ranchers seeing things move out there even when the lights were gone. I shrugged it off. People in small towns like that loved a story. That night I went back out again, determined to get something clearer. Around midnight I saw the lights again, 2 this time. They danced near the horizon, weaving together like fireflies. I was so focused through the lens that it took me a second to realize one of them wasn't on the horizon anymore. It was higher. I lowered the camera and blinked. The other light remained far away, but one glow hovered maybe 100 yards from the house. My pulse picked up. It didn't look like a flare or a drone. It just hung there, swaying gently. Then slowly it began to rise. Higher, until it disappeared above the roof. A second later, the ceiling above me lit up faintly through the cracks in the boards. The glow was coming from the attic. Every hair on my neck stood up. I grabbed the flashlight and the old pull string to the attic hatch in the hallway. I hesitated, staring at the square of darkness above me. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. I pulled. The wooden ladder creaked down and a wave of dry, cold air spilled over me. I aimed the flashlight up. Dust floated like snow. The light beam cut across the rafters, and for a moment I saw nothing. Then something moved. A brief shimmer like glass catching light. I stepped up the ladder, every step moaning under my weight. The attic smelled of dead mice and age. My light traced over old trunks, broken furniture, and piles of insulation. The glow wasn't there now, but the air still felt charged like after lightning. My camera bag was downstairs, but I had my phone. I started recording as I panned around. Then came a faint sound behind me. A slow scraping drag across the boards, the same one I'd heard the night before. I spun the light. Nothing. The air pressed heavy on me, and then I heard it again, closer from the corner where the roof sloped low. I crouched, heart pounding, shining the beam toward the sound. Something was shifting under the insulation. The mound rippled, then went still. I wanted to get out, but something in me, curiosity, maybe stupidity, made me step closer. I reached down and peeled back a handful of insulation. Underneath was old rotted plywood covering a hole. I leaned closer. The edges were burned, blackened. Then the glow returned, seeping faintly from the cracks around the wood. It was the same white pulse I'd seen outside, only now it had a warmth to it, a rhythm like breathing. I raised my phone closer. The recording showed a haze of light leaking through. Then something hit the wood from beneath, hard enough to make dust rain from the rafters. I jumped back and dropped my phone. The glow went out. I scrambled down the ladder, slammed the hatch shut, and didn't stop running until I was outside. The desert was utterly still again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was breathing behind me. I sat out there until dawn, too scared to go back in. When the sun came up, I forced myself inside to grab my gear. My phone was still lying in the hallway where I dropped it. The screen was cracked, but the video was still there. I watched it later in my car. It showed the light, faint but real. Then the moment before the hit, just a frame or two, you could see something moving under the boards. Not human. Long, jointed, almost like an arm, but not built right. I left Marfa that day, driving east until the mountains were behind me. I didn't tell the owner about what I'd seen when I dropped off the keys. She asked if I'd gotten any good shots. I told her I had. When I got home, I uploaded the photos to my computer. Most were blank frames of desert and stars. But one image stood out, the last one before I went inside. The glow that had hovered over the roof was still there, faintly visible, but now I could see the outline of the house below it. And in the dark upper window of the attic, a dim shape was staring out, reflecting the same pale light I'd been chasing all along. During a thunderstorm that rolled across the flat plains east of Pecos, Sam and Olivia found themselves lost on the long stretch of Highway 285. They had been driving from El Paso toward Fort Stockton when the rain thickened into sheets, wind slapping their windshield so hard the wipers couldn't keep up. They'd passed no open gas stations for an hour, no other cars, and their phones had both lost signal somewhere near a dirt turnoff labeled County Road 118. When Sam finally spotted the faint outline of a building up ahead, he slowed down, squinting through the downpour. It looked like a diner at first glance. An old-fashioned, low-roofed structure with curved chrome edges and a faded neon sign barely hanging by a single wire. But as they got closer, Olivia realized it wasn't quite right. The windows were blacked out. The sign had no letters left on it, and the entire place looked as if it had been scooped off the side of a highway in the 1950s and dropped here, in the middle of nowhere. They pulled off the road and parked near the front steps. The rain drummed on the car roof. The building was shaped exactly like a diner, complete with a half-round counter visible through the grime-covered glass. But when Sam tried the door, it creaked open too easily. No resistance. No lock. The smell hit them first, not rot, but something stranger, heavier. It was faintly sweet and greasy, like bacon fat that had been reheated over and over for years. Olivia hesitated. "You smell that?" Sam nodded, though the scent seemed to make him hungrier than uneasy. The place was dry at least, and the wind outside howled across the empty flats. "We'll wait out the storm here," he said. "Just for a few hours." Inside, their flashlight beams cut through layers of dust and cobwebs. Red leather booths lined the wall, cracked and split. The counter still had metal stools bolted to the floor. Behind it stood a row of old kitchen equipment: stove, flat-top grill, coffee maker, all of it blanketed in grime. The clock above the counter was stuck at 2:37. There was a calendar on the wall, yellowed with age, still showing August 1961. Sam found a stack of menus, their pages curled, offering bacon and eggs for 50 cents. He chuckled softly and laid one down. "Guess this place didn't survive the interstate." They set up near one of the corner booths, using a lantern from the car. Olivia wrapped herself in her jacket and leaned against the cracked vinyl while Sam looked around. The storm outside had started to ease, replaced by the rhythmic ticking of rain dripping from the roof. It was almost peaceful until that smell came again, stronger this time. The air thickened with it, warm and oily. Sam lifted his head. "You smell that again?" Olivia frowned. "Yeah, that's not just in our heads, is it?" He walked behind the counter, brushing aside cobwebs to peer into the kitchen. The stove was cold, the metal surface dusty. He touched one of the old frying pans and left a clean fingerprint streak. No heat, no signs of use for decades. Still, the smell was unmistakable now. Bacon sizzling, faintly burning. He turned off the lantern, and for a moment the room was black except for a dim light that seemed to shimmer from somewhere deeper inside. He followed it cautiously until he realized it wasn't light. It was movement, a faint pulse of reflection from grease that seemed fresh on the old griddle top. He wiped his finger across it and pulled it back, glistening. Warm. He froze. "Liv," he whispered. She came over reluctantly, holding the lantern low. "What is it?" He showed her the grease on his finger. She blinked. "That's impossible." It's warm, he nodded, like something just cooked. They looked at each other in silence, the rain outside beginning to pick up again, a steady hiss against the windows. Around midnight, they both tried to sleep in the booth. The smell came and went in waves, frying bacon, then faint toast, then the scent of brewed coffee. Olivia stirred awake each time, uneasy but too tired to speak. The last time she opened her eyes, she thought she saw movement behind the counter. Not a person exactly, but a dim shape that passed by, blocking the glint of the lantern light. When she sat up, it was gone. She told herself she'd imagined it. The air felt warmer than before, humid, almost as if the kitchen was alive again. Sam couldn't sleep either. Around 2 a.m, he got up to look outside. The rain had stopped completely, but the world beyond the windows was pitch black. No moon, no stars, just endless plains and the faint echo of wind. When he turned back, Olivia was sitting upright. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. He listened. At first, it was just the settling of the building. Then came a faint sound from the kitchen, a rhythmic tap like a spatula hitting metal. He shined the flashlight toward the counter, but the beam flickered, dimmed, then went out. The tapping continued, steady, unhurried, as if someone were flipping breakfast. Sam felt the floor tremble beneath his boots. "Hello?" he called out, voice tight. The tapping stopped. A second later came another sound, the faint crackle of grease, unmistakable. Then the smell hit again, stronger than ever, filling the diner until it was suffocating. Olivia covered her mouth. "Sam, I think we should go." He nodded and started toward the door, but something about the air changed as he moved. The temperature dropped instantly, and he heard the faint hum of electricity. The neon sign outside flickered once through the dusty windows. Dead for decades, now faintly glowing a dull red. Letters appeared through the grime, just long enough for him to make out the word "open." They ran for the door, but when Sam yanked it, it wouldn't move. The handle turned freely, yet the frame stayed sealed. He slammed his shoulder against it, but the door gave nothing. Olivia backed away, her eyes wide. "Sam," she whispered. "Look." He turned to see her pointing toward the counter. A man stood there now, or the shape of one. His outline shimmered in the lantern glow, like smoke in the shape of a cook wearing a grease-stained apron. His head was down, focused on the griddle in front of him, hand moving steadily with a spatula. The sound of sizzling filled the room again, louder this time. Sam's voice cracked. "Who are you?" The figure didn't respond, didn't even turn, just kept cooking, flipping something that hissed and popped. Then slowly it lifted its head. Where a face should have been was blackened skin, featureless except for a single wet line where a mouth might have been burned away. The head tilted slightly and the sound of frying grew violent. Grease sprayed across the counter, hissing where it hit the floor. Olivia screamed and grabbed Sam's arm. The air grew thick with smoke, though nothing burned. The figure's body began to tremble as if glitching through itself, and with each flicker the smell changed. From bacon to rot, from grease to sulfur, until the stench was unbearable. The lantern blew out, plunging them into darkness. In that pitch black, the sizzling stopped, replaced by slow, deliberate footsteps behind the counter. Then another sound, metal dragging across tiles, something heavy scraping closer. Sam fumbled for his phone, trying to use the faint light of the screen. The clock read 2:37, the same time frozen on the wall clock. When he looked up again, the glow caught a face in front of him. Not the burned one. Olivia's face, except her expression was wrong. Blank, slack, her pupils dilated so wide her eyes looked black. "Liv?" he whispered. Her head twitched, her voice coming out low and strange. "It's ready." Then her body convulsed and she collapsed onto the floor, smoke curling from her hair as if she'd stood too close to an open flame. Sam grabbed her shoulders, shouting her name, but her skin was cold and slick with something like oil. He could smell it again, cooked fat, frying meat. The sound of sizzling rose from somewhere near her, but he couldn't see anything in the darkness. He stumbled back toward the door, coughing through the smoke. Then suddenly the neon sign outside flashed bright red again, bathing the room in color. For an instant he saw everything. The figure behind the counter grinning now, its face split open like burned flesh cracking apart. The griddle glowing red hot with shapes that looked like human hands pressed into the surface. And Olivia's body lying near the booth, her skin blistered and blackened. The lights went out again and Sam finally felt the door give way. He fell through it into the cold night air. When he looked back, the diner was completely dark again. The sign was dead, the smell gone. He ran to the car, shaking, started it, and didn't stop until the first light of dawn touched the horizon. When he looked in the rearview mirror, there was nothing behind him but flat land. No diner, no building, just open desert, he told the Pecos sheriff the next morning. But when they searched the stretch of road he described, there was nothing there. No structure, no foundation, not even tire tracks where he'd parked. The sheriff said the old diner on 285 had burned down in 1961 after a grease fire killed the cook and the two travelers he'd been serving breakfast to before sunrise. Sam didn't respond. He just looked down at his hands, still glistening faintly with something that smelled like bacon fat. In the outskirts of Mineral Wells, beyond the last gas station and past a field of rusted windmill towers, there was a narrow dirt road that led to a forgotten neighborhood. Most of the houses had collapsed into their own basements, roofs caved in, foundations cracked by the creeping roots of mesquite trees. But one house still stood upright, lonely and pale, its front porch sagging like a tired grin. The locals said it was built in the 1940s by a family that left in the middle of the night and never came back. The windows were boarded and the doors were chained shut until the county cleared it years ago. It was that kind of place that made you wonder what kind of memories it still held in the walls. The man who found it, his name was Carter, wasn't a ghost hunter or anything like that. He was just a surveyor who sometimes took freelance work cataloging old structures for insurance records. The Mineral Wells area was dotted with half-abandoned properties, most falling apart faster than the paperwork could catch up. He drove out one overcast afternoon with his camera, a flashlight, and a thermos of coffee. When he parked at the end of the dirt path, the house was already visible between the brittle weeds, a pale structure with peeling white paint and shuttered eyes. The air smelled faintly metallic, like rain that hadn't arrived yet. Inside, the air was still. He pushed the door open with a slow creak and stepped into a foyer that smelled of dust and cedar. The wallpaper had yellowed into a sickly cream, and every corner had its own spider colony. He noticed something odd right away. Every mirror in the house was covered. There were sheets tacked over them, thick with age, some yellow, some almost translucent from time. One in the hallway near the stairs had a faint imprint of a small hand outlined in dust. He made a mental note but didn't think much of it. Old houses had their quirks, especially when people died or left in a hurry. Sometimes they covered mirrors for mourning. He remembered reading that somewhere. He began photographing each room systematically. The living room first, then the kitchen with its cracked linoleum floor and collapsed cabinets. The refrigerator was an ancient model with chrome handles, and when he tugged it open, the stench of mildew hit him like a wall. He closed it quickly and moved on. The hallway that led toward the back of the house was narrow, with light barely filtering through the dusty windows. He stopped at the mirror there, the one with the handprint. The sheet was sagging on one corner, almost inviting him to lift it. He hesitated for a moment, then told himself it was just a mirror, just another item to document. When he pulled the sheet down, a puff of dust billowed into the air. He coughed and waved his hand in front of his face. The mirror was large, the kind you might find in a hotel corridor. Its frame carved from oak and blackened with time. It reflected the hallway behind him, the faint light from the door, and his own silhouette. Tall, middle-aged, with a camera hanging around his neck. For a moment, everything looked normal. Then he noticed something faintly off. In the reflection at the far end of the hallway, near where the stairs began, there was a figure. He froze. It was small, childlike, the shape of a girl in a light-colored dress, standing still. She wasn't there when he looked over his shoulder. The hallway behind him was empty, silent except for the faint creak of the house settling. He turned back to the mirror. The girl was still there, head slightly tilted, her arms at her sides. He could see her clearly now, shoulder-length hair, pale skin, and a smile that didn't move like it belonged to her. He stepped back instinctively, bumping into the wall. His camera strap caught on a nail and he yanked it free, trying to convince himself it was a trick of light, a residue on the mirror's surface. He angled the flashlight, shining it down the hall. Nothing. He turned the light toward the mirror again, and now it was only his reflection. He exhaled, slow, nervous laughter slipping out as he shook his head. He covered the mirror again and told himself he was just tired, maybe seeing shadows. He continued the survey upstairs. The second floor was worse. The air felt heavier there, like it hadn't been breathed in decades. There were 3 bedrooms and a bathroom. In one of the rooms, an old dollhouse sat against the wall, perfectly intact, the little furniture still arranged inside. He took a picture of it and felt a chill as he did, like something had moved behind him. But every time he turned, the space was empty. He finished the documentation quickly after that, taking hurried notes. As he started down the stairs, he noticed that the sheet he'd replaced over the hallway mirror had fallen off again. He stared at it from the landing. The sheet lay crumpled on the floor as if it had been pulled down deliberately. The mirror was bare again, and in it his reflection was alone. For a moment he almost believed he'd imagined the whole thing. He started down the last few steps, still watching the glass. Then halfway down he saw movement. The girl was there again. But this time she wasn't at the end of the hall. She was standing directly behind his reflection, only a foot away, her grin widening as he froze in place. He turned, but there was nothing behind him, just the dim hallway and the dust swirling in the air. The reflection, however, didn't change. The girl stayed where she was, smiling behind his mirrored self. Then she raised her hand and pressed it against his shoulder in the reflection. He felt it, the faint pressure like a cold palm resting against his back. He bolted. Outside, he stumbled into the sunlight, gasping, his pulse hammering. He stood there for several minutes beside his truck, trying to steady himself. The rational part of his mind fought to explain it. Optical illusion, exhaustion, stress. He left the house that afternoon and didn't return for several days, not until his supervisor called asking for the rest of the photo set. Against his better judgment, he decided to go back. When he returned, the weather had turned gray. The air was colder, and the sky hung low with rain clouds. Inside, the house felt different, more still, more aware of him. Every creak sounded deliberate. The sheet still covered most of the mirrors, but the one in the hallway was gone entirely. He found it leaned against the wall in the living room. He didn't move it, didn't touch it. He just took the remaining photos and tried to finish as quickly as possible. As he packed up, he noticed something odd in the viewfinder of his camera. Each picture he'd taken of the mirrors, every single one, had the faint shape of that girl in the background. Sometimes near the stairs, sometimes in the doorway, sometimes closer. Her expression never changed. Always that smile, tilted and small, like she was pleased he was noticing her now. He deleted the photos. Every one of them. But when he checked the memory card later that night, they were still there. Not in his folders, but in a hidden cache. The file names changed to timestamps that didn't match the real time he'd been in the house. One photo showed her hand reaching toward the camera lens, her fingers blurred as if mid-motion. That night in his apartment, the mirrors began to fog over without reason. He lived alone, windows closed, no humidity. He noticed it first in the bathroom, a faint smear in the glass that looked like a handprint. Then in the hallway mirror by his coat rack, where for a split second he thought he saw a child's shadow slip behind him. By the third night, he couldn't sleep. The mirrors reflected shapes that weren't there, corners of his room that seemed deeper than they should be. He tried covering them, but the sheets would always fall before morning. Once, as he turned off the bedroom light, he caught the faint reflection of a little girl standing at the foot of his bed. She was smiling, her eyes bright and wrong, as if they saw him from inside the glass, not from the room itself. He left Mineral Wells a week later, turned in his resignation, and never went back to the house. The report was left unfinished, the photographs erased, at least he thought they were. Months later, when he bought a used truck in Fort Worth and paired his phone to the stereo, the screen flashed for a moment, and an image appeared before the Bluetooth connected. It was her again, that same girl standing in a dim hallway behind a man holding a camera. The mirror in his new apartment was covered that night. But just before dawn, something tugged the sheet down. On the evening the storm rolled in across the plains, Caleb Wright had been following a line of dark, green-black clouds that moved like something alive over the horizon. He had been a storm chaser for most of his life, drawn to the violence of nature, the spinning chaos of wind and thunder. But that night, west of Lubbock, as the wall cloud devoured the sun, he knew he had pushed too far. The air had gone strangely warm, heavy with static and dust, and his weather radio had gone dead without warning. He turned off the highway onto a dirt road that cut through miles of open farmland, headlights carving brief tunnels of visibility through sheets of rain. His wipers struggled against the wind-driven mud, and at one point he thought he saw a barn roof lift off like a piece of tin foil. When the road ended, he saw a structure sitting in the middle of a field, a two-story farmhouse, its paint peeled to gray, its windows dark. He didn't hesitate. He parked close to the porch and sprinted through the rain, clutching his camera bag like it was life itself. The front door was unlocked, which somehow unsettled him more than if it had been sealed. Inside, the house smelled of dust and wet wood. There were no footprints in the dirt-caked floorboards, no sound but the steady moan of wind through the chimney. He called out once, his voice echoing off the empty rooms, but nothing answered except the thunder outside. He set his equipment down in what had once been a living room. The walls were lined with framed photographs, old black and white portraits of a family in Sunday clothes, none smiling. The faces were clear despite the age of the glass, though the father's eyes seemed to have been scratched away deliberately. On a narrow shelf above the fireplace sat half a dozen clocks. Mantel clocks, carriage clocks, even a small pocket watch laid open on its chain. None were running, their hands frozen at different times. Caleb found it oddly comforting, the way silence filled the house so completely. He figured he'd wait out the worst of the storm, maybe check radar once his radio reconnected. By midnight, the wind had died to a whisper, though lightning still flashed in the distance. Caleb had dozed off in an armchair when a sharp sound jolted him upright. A single tick, then another. Then all at once, 100 tiny mechanical hearts began beating. Every clock in the house had started ticking, each pendulum swaying in rhythm, their second hands moving in unison. He looked at his watch, 12:03 a.m., but every clock on the walls, on the shelves, on the mantel, pointed to the same time, 3:17. He stood there in the half-dark, lit only by intermittent flashes of lightning, and listened as the air filled with layered, overlapping ticks that seemed to crawl under his skin. He moved from room to room trying to find a reason, a draft, something mechanical that could explain it. None of the clocks were plugged in. None had batteries. The pendulums swung freely, but there was no power. He decided the storm had messed with his nerves. Maybe he'd imagined silence before. He shut the door to the sitting room and climbed the stairs. The second floor was lined with more clocks, a row of them mounted above each bedroom door as if someone had collected them compulsively. They too were all ticking. He noticed something stranger now. The farther he went down the hall, the louder they grew, not just in volume but in pitch, like the ticking itself was sharpening. He stopped at the last door on the left. The handle was cold to the touch. When he turned it, it gave easily, revealing a small bedroom empty except for a narrow bed, a nightstand, and a single clock on the wall directly across from the bed. Its glass face was cracked. Its hands pointed to 3:17, frozen just like the others. Caleb felt his throat tighten. He reached toward it, and when his fingertips brushed the glass, the hands moved backward just once, a full minute in reverse. He backed out of the room, heart hammering. The ticking seemed to follow him now, layered and echoing waves that filled the hallway. He descended the stairs 2 at a time, only to find the clocks on the ground floor had stopped again. All of them. The house went deathly silent. He could hear rain dripping from the gutters outside. He tried to tell himself he was just tired. Storm chasers lived on adrenaline and caffeine. Sleep deprivation could play tricks. He lit a candle from his pack since the power was gone and placed it on the table. The flicker threw shadows across the photographs on the walls. He stared at one in particular. The family gathered on that very porch. The father stood behind his wife and 3 children, his face strangely blurred. But something else drew Caleb's attention. In the window behind them, in the faint reflection of glass, he could see a 4th child, smaller, standing alone inside, looking directly at the camera. He checked again. None of the other photos had that figure. He brought the candle closer, squinting at the image. The child's face was pale, expression unreadable. One small hand pressed against the window. The moment he noticed that something creaked above him, a slow dragging sound like footsteps across the second floor. He froze. Then another step, deliberate, pacing toward the top of the stairs. He blew out the candle, instinctively wanting darkness. Lightning flickered through the windows, casting brief skeletal outlines across the walls. The steps continued until they reached the top landing. Silence again. He waited, barely breathing, then turned toward the stairwell. In the next flash of lightning, he saw a shape, small, about the height of a child, standing at the railing. Its head was tilted. He stumbled backward, nearly tripping over his bag. The thunder cracked overhead, shaking the windows. When he looked again, the shape was gone. He grabbed his camera, fumbling with the lens, desperate to rationalize what he saw. Maybe it was a shadow, an illusion from the candlelight. But when he raised the camera and looked through the viewfinder, He realized the display was showing the inside of the house even though the lens cap was still on. Static danced across the small screen, shapes forming and dissolving. Furniture, stairs, then a figure walking slowly down them. Caleb tore the cap off and pointed the camera at the staircase. Nothing. The display, however, showed a child standing halfway down, staring directly into the camera. Her hands were clasped over her chest. Behind her, all the clocks on the wall had begun ticking again. Caleb dropped the camera and bolted for the front door, but when he yanked it open, a blast of freezing wind hit him full in the chest. The rain had stopped, yet outside was pitch black. Not night black, but absolute void. No stars, no lightning, no horizon. Just the porch steps dissolving into darkness. He shut the door hard, breath coming in gasps. His watch had stopped at 3:17. He turned slowly toward the living room. Every clock ticked louder, synchronized now, each chime aligning with the next. The air grew thicker, colder. The pendulum swung violently, striking against their glass casings. Caleb shouted, begged whatever was there to stop. The clocks only grew louder until they sounded like hammer blows. Then as suddenly as it began, it ended. Silence again, total and suffocating. He could hear only his own heartbeat. The air smelled of iron and damp wood. He took one cautious step toward the window. Outside, the world had returned, rain dripping, trees bending under the wind. He told himself to leave, but something made him glance once more at the nearest clock. Its hands were moving backward. He checked the others. All were rewinding second by second, minute by minute, until they all stopped again. Not at 3:17 this time, but 12:03, the moment he'd first heard them tick. When dawn broke, the farmhouse stood empty again. Caleb's car was still parked out front, engine cold, doors locked from the inside. His equipment was found days later by a rancher checking fence lines. The clocks inside the house were still ticking, all of them set to 3:17. No trace of Caleb was ever found, but some say on stormy nights west of Lubbock, when the wind turns warm and the sky glows green, the old farmhouse lights up inside, and if you listen close enough, you can hear hundreds of tiny clocks ticking in perfect, impossible unison. Ethan was 21 when he decided to spend the night in the old Renfield plantation house outside Nacogdoches. The place had been abandoned since the 1940s, standing at the end of a dirt road swallowed by pines and moss. Its windows were long gone, its roof sagged, and the air inside smelled like wet leaves and wood rot. Locals said you could still hear the piano playing there at night, a lullaby that had outlasted its player. Ethan didn't believe in ghost stories, but as a music major at Stephen F. Austin, he loved old instruments. A friend told him the Renfield house still had a grand piano sitting in the parlor, warped but intact. He decided to see it for himself and record its sound for a school project on historical acoustics. He arrived just before dusk, his old truck crunching the gravel as the house came into view. The tall columns were split, the front porch bowed like a tired back. Kudzu had claimed the sides, crawling up to the second-floor balcony. When he stepped out, the air was heavy, carrying the faint smell of something sweet and decayed. The wind moved through the trees with a slow hiss like distant whispering. Inside, his flashlight beam cut through layers of dust. Wallpaper hung loose in curls, and the floor creaked like it was exhaling under his weight. He set his gear near the staircase, a sleeping bag, a thermos of coffee, his camera, and a digital recorder. Then he followed the hallway into the parlor. The piano was there, just as promised. A 19th century upright, its keys yellowed and warped, strings rusted but intact. The lid was open, showing the tangled hammers and cobwebs. A single child's chair sat beside it, as if someone had been listening long ago. Ethan ran a finger along the edge and brushed off the dust. It left a streak of black on his skin. He sat down and pressed a key. The sound that came out was dry and hollow, but it carried, echoing softly across the parlor. He tried another, then a few more, shaping the beginning of a tune he half remembered from somewhere. Something soft and repetitive, like a lullaby. The sound was oddly comforting in the gloom. He checked his watch. 8:47 p.m. He set the recorder on the piano lid, turned it on, and started to improvise quietly. After a while, he heard a faint tapping sound behind the wall. It stopped when he did. He told himself it was just a squirrel or the wind. By midnight, the temperature had dropped. The forest outside was silent except for a few insects. and the moonlight through the broken window made the room look silver and skeletal. Ethan lay in his sleeping bag in the hallway, the piano a few feet away. The house made soft, shifting sounds, the kind old wood makes when it remembers weight. He started drifting toward sleep, the scent of mildew thick in his nose when something faint began to stir. A sound, soft but distinct, like a single key being pressed. Then another. He opened his eyes. His flashlight was off, but he could see a dim outline of the piano in the next room, pale under the moonlight. Another note sounded, this time lower than a third, forming the beginning of a melody. His first thought was that the wind had slipped through the cracks and nudged the strings. But the notes were deliberate, slow, childlike. He sat up and whispered, "Hello?" No answer. The music continued, halting, uneven, like someone relearning a song after years of silence. It took him a few seconds to recognize it. It was the same lullaby he had been playing earlier. Exactly the same rhythm, same hesitations. He stood, his pulse pounding in his throat, and stepped toward the parlor doorway. The piano keys moved on their own, some sinking halfway, others tapping lightly before lifting. There was no one in the room. He froze in the doorway, breath held. As the lullaby reached the part where it circled back to the opening, he whispered again, louder this time, "Who's there?" The music stopped instantly. The silence that followed was heavier than before, so thick it felt like it had weight. The house seemed to be holding its breath. Then came a single high note, sharp and bright. Ethan jumped. The note lingered, vibrating in the air, and then died. He could hear his heartbeat, could feel it in his fingertips. He turned on his flashlight and swept the beam across the room. Dust motes spun in the air. The keys were still. The child's chair was slightly turned, angled toward him now instead of the piano. He backed out of the doorway and laughed nervously. "You're imagining things," he said aloud, his voice cracking. He sat back down in the hallway, pulled his sleeping bag around him, and stared at the parlor until his eyes burned. Around 2:30, exhaustion took over. When he woke again, the room was dark. His watch said 3:02 a.m. The lullaby was playing again. This time it was slower, smoother. The melody rolled through the house like a whispering current. Ethan's breath caught in his chest. It wasn't the piano alone now. He could hear humming beneath it, faint but human, like a woman's voice following the notes. The tune wove itself around him, pulling him toward the parlor. He stood half in a trance and followed the sound. The flashlight flickered as he moved closer. When he reached the doorway, he saw something that made his knees weaken. The piano lid was closed now, but the keys still moved as if pressed by invisible fingers. The humming came from just behind the piano, from the corner of the room where the shadows were thickest. It was soft, tender, almost loving. He whispered, "Who's there?" The humming stopped. For a second there was only silence, and then a whisper so close to his ear that he flinched. "Don't stop now." He spun around, but no one was there. His flashlight slipped from his hand and hit the floor, the beam swinging wildly. When it steadied, it pointed toward the piano. The lid had lifted. Inside, the strings trembled even though no keys were pressed. Ethan stumbled backward, breathing fast, and hit the wall. He turned and ran for the front door, but the knob was rusted tight. He pulled and kicked until the door shuddered, but it wouldn't open. Behind him, the piano struck a loud, discordant chord that echoed through the house. Then another and another, faster and more violent, until it sounded like a storm of noise. The air seemed to vibrate with it. He screamed for it to stop, covering his ears, but the sound grew louder. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The house was silent. He turned slowly. The piano lid was down again, the keys still. The flashlight beam shook in his hand. He stood there for a long time before he dared move again. Finally, he walked to the piano, every step heavy with dread. There was something resting on the keys, a small gray object. He leaned closer and realized it was a music box, the kind with a crank on the side. He hadn't seen it before. It looked old, its surface etched with faded roses. He picked it up and opened it. Inside, the tiny metal comb began to pluck the same lullaby that had played all night. He dropped it and the lid snapped shut. The front door swung open with a long groan. Cold air rushed in from outside. Ethan didn't think. He ran, stumbling down the steps through the trees until his truck came into view. He threw himself inside, locked the doors, and sat shaking until dawn. The next day, when he returned with his professor and a few classmates, the piano was gone. Only deep drag marks on the floor remained, as if it had been pulled out through the back door. No one could explain it. The professor joked that maybe some collector took it years ago, but the dust patterns around the room said otherwise. The only thing they found was the small music box on the mantel, perfectly clean. Ethan left Nacogdoches a few weeks later. He tried to forget what he heard that night, but the recording he made didn't help. When he played it back, there was a gap around 3 in the morning where the sound cut out completely. Then, just before the track ended, a faint voice whispered, "Play it again." He deleted the file, but sometimes, when he lay awake at night in his apartment, he swore he could hear a faint lullaby drifting through the walls. Always at 3. A renovation job in the woods outside Tyler sounded like easy money to Greg until the foreman told him he'd need to sleep there overnight to guard the tools. The old farmhouse stood on a patch of land where the pines grew too close and the ground stayed soft even in drought. The roof had holes, the porch sagged, and the wallpaper inside was yellowed, bubbled, and peeled away in long, curling strips like old skin. The house had been empty for decades, and the crew only came during daylight. No one wanted to be there after dark. Greg didn't care. He'd slept in worse places, and an extra $100 just to keep watch sounded fair. He parked his truck near the front steps and set up his sleeping bag in what used to be the living room. The walls there were covered in an ugly pattern of blue flowers that had faded to gray. Every time the wind pushed through the broken windows, the loose wallpaper fluttered softly, as if breathing. He didn't notice the sound at first. It was faint and mixed with the chirping of insects, the rustling of leaves, and the distant croak of frogs from the creek. But sometime after midnight, when the night went still, he realized there was another noise, subtle but deliberate, like a low whisper pressed right against the wall. It wasn't the wind. It was the cadence that made him sit up, the rhythm of speech only too soft to make out the words. He turned on his flashlight and aimed it at the wall. The wallpaper hung unevenly in places, and he could see cracks between the seams where the old plaster showed through. He got up, pressed his ear close, and listened. The whispering stopped immediately, replaced by silence so complete that his own breathing sounded too loud. He told himself it was mice, or maybe the wind slipping behind the paper. Still, he dragged his sleeping bag to the center of the room, away from the wall, and tried to sleep again. It was nearly 3 in the morning when the whispers came back. Louder this time. He could make out something like multiple voices, overlapping, whispering fast, urgent, as if they were trying to be heard but were trapped somewhere behind the plaster. He turned on his phone's light and recorded for a few seconds, but the sound vanished the moment he started recording. When he stopped, it returned. That chilled him. He packed his things, decided to sleep in his truck, and was halfway out the door when the foreman's warning came back to him. Vandals had broken into nearby construction sites before, stealing copper and tools. If he left and something was stolen, he'd lose the bonus and maybe the job. He sighed, cursed under his breath, and went back inside. To calm himself, he cracked open a beer and sat on a stool by the wall. "All right," he muttered. "If you're ghosts or whatever, just keep it down till morning." The wallpaper stirred slightly, like something brushing it from behind. He froze. A faint bulge appeared beneath the floral pattern, swelling outward as if fingers were pressing against the paper from the other side. He stumbled backward and the bulge flattened instantly. The room fell dead quiet again, but he could hear his pulse pounding in his ears. He turned on every light he could, an old lantern, his phone, even the headlights through the window. But no matter how bright it got, the wall seemed to soak the light up, dull and pale as parchment. He didn't sleep after that. When dawn came, he found that the wall looked perfectly normal again, except for the faint outline of 5 finger marks near where he had seen the bulge. The crew arrived around 8. Greg didn't mention what happened. He helped them unload materials and acted like nothing was wrong. But all through the day, when the others weren't looking, he caught himself staring at that same patch of wall. During lunch, one of the older workers, Ray, noticed him looking and laughed. "You hear it, didn't you?" he said. Greg blinked. "Hear what?" "The house whispering. Everyone hears it their first night here. My cousin used to live here back in the 60s. Said her daddy sealed up one of the rooms after his wife lost her mind. Tore all the wallpaper down except in that parlor. Said he couldn't stand the sound of her voice coming from behind it." Greg frowned. "You're joking." Ray just shrugged. "Ask around. People in town still talk about it. The woman thought there were people living in the walls. Kept saying they called her name at night." He chuckled, but his eyes didn't match the tone. They found her hanging from the rafters, right under that same wall. That night, Greg told himself he wouldn't stay again, but the foreman was behind schedule and offered him double pay to watch over some new power tools that had arrived. Against his better judgment, he agreed. He set up his cot in another room this time, the kitchen, where the walls were bare. Still, even with 2 rooms between him and the parlor, he heard the whispering start again around midnight. It was louder than before, clearer, almost conversational. He could make out snippets that chilled him. Underneath, "Can't breathe, please." He got up and went to the doorway of the parlor. The flashlight beam cut across the floor and landed on the wall. The wallpaper was rippling now, undulating in slow waves as though something alive moved beneath it. He took a step closer and the whispers swelled. Dozens of voices now, maybe hundreds, all pressed together in a muffled chorus. He could feel faint vibrations through the floorboards like a heartbeat. Then the wall itself gave a sudden, soft pop, and a long tear opened along one seam, peeling downward with a slow hiss. A wave of foul, damp air poured out, heavy with rot and something metallic. Greg stumbled back, gagging, his light trembling in his hand. The plaster beneath was blackened, moist and studded with something that caught the light. He leaned in, squinting. Human teeth, dozens of them embedded in the plaster as though grown there. And between them, faintly moving, were thin strands of something pale, twitching like roots. The whispers rose to a shriek that only he could hear inside his skull, and he dropped the flashlight. The beam rolled across the floor, catching his reflection in a shard of broken glass. His mouth hung open, but the whispering continued in perfect sync with his breath. When the crew came back the next morning, Greg was gone. His truck was still there, his tools untouched, his sleeping bag neatly rolled by the wall. But on the wallpaper, the floral pattern had changed. Where the flowers used to be, there were faces now, faint gray outlines of eyes and mouths pressed into the paper as if seen through thin cloth. If you stood there long enough, the foreman swore, you could still hear the faint sound of breathing behind the wall, as though the house had swallowed another voice and was waiting patiently for the next one. In San Marcos, there's a stretch of old houses on the east side that everyone seems to forget about. They're half swallowed by trees and kudzu, with driveways leading nowhere and mailboxes hanging open like mouths. Ryan and Lena found one of those places after they'd been living out of their car for a week, sleeping at rest stops and washing up in gas station bathrooms. It was a 2-story house with faded blue paint and a front porch that sagged in the middle. The windows were boarded, but the back door was already broken. Inside, it smelled of damp wood, mildew, and dust so thick it turned their shoes gray. But it was shelter, and that was enough. They set up their sleeping bags in the living room. Ryan found an old kerosene lamp that still worked, and the faint yellow light pushed back just enough darkness to make the house seem bigger than it was. That first night, they heard a few things. Creaks upstairs, a faint scrape like something brushing along a wall. But every abandoned place makes sounds, especially in Texas humidity. By the second day, they started exploring. Most of the rooms were empty, stripped bare down to the floorboards. Someone had tried to renovate at some point. The smell of old paint still lingered in some corners. The walls were scratched in places, and one of the banisters on the staircase had splintered clean through. In the upstairs hallway, though, there was a door that stood out. It was painted a deep, dark red that flaked at the edges like dried blood. Across the frame, thick nails had been driven straight through the wood. Lena laughed nervously when she saw it. Guess someone didn't want whatever's in there getting out. Ryan tapped the boards with a screwdriver he'd found. They were old but solid. Or maybe they didn't want anyone getting in. They left it alone that day. But at night, lying in the quiet, Ryan heard something faint from above them. It was rhythmic, almost gentle, like breathing, but deeper, more deliberate. The floorboards creaked now and then, and he told himself it was just the wood expanding with the night air. Still, every time he started to drift off, the sound would rise again. Just barely audible. Lena didn't hear it. She slept heavy, the kind of sleep that comes when you haven't had a safe place in weeks. The next morning, Ryan went back upstairs. The red door looked the same, but the boards seemed newer somehow. He could have sworn one of the nails hadn't been there before. He put his hand on the surface and felt something strange, warmth, like someone had been leaning on the other side. He jerked his hand back and forced a laugh, but his pulse was still jumping when he went back downstairs. Lena teased him that afternoon. "You're just looking for something to freak out about." "You're worse than the ghost tour people in the square." She wasn't wrong. Ryan had always been the one who watched the shadows too long, who heard too much in the quiet. Still, when night fell again, he couldn't shake the idea that something was moving up there. Around 3 in the morning, he woke suddenly. The lamp had gone out, but faint moonlight filtered through a broken window. He lay there listening. For a few minutes, there was nothing. Then came the sound again, breathing low and steady right above them. It wasn't coming from the walls this time. It was coming through the floor. Ryan sat up and nudged Lena. "Do you hear that?" She mumbled something and rolled over. He waited a few seconds, heart pounding. The sound grew louder, closer. He stood, grabbed the lamp, and started up the stairs. Each step creaked like it was warning him to stop. The air grew heavy as he neared the red door. When he reached it, the sound stopped. Total silence. Even the insects outside had gone quiet. He held the lamp close to the wood. The paint glistened as if wet, and there was a faint metallic tang in the air, iron like rust or blood. He leaned closer, and that's when he heard it again. A slow, deliberate inhale, followed by a faint exhale that fogged the crack between the boards. Something alive was behind that door. Ryan stumbled back, almost dropping the lamp. He ran downstairs and shook Lena awake. "There's something in that room," he whispered. She groaned, pulled the blanket over her face, and told him to get some sleep. He sat up for hours instead, staring at the ceiling until dawn. The next morning he tried to laugh it off. Maybe it was a raccoon or a coyote trapped inside. He convinced Lena to help him pry the boards off. They worked for nearly an hour, pulling out nails one by one. The last plank came loose with a crack and the door creaked open. The smell hit them first, thick and metallic like an old slaughterhouse. Inside, the room was dark except for a sliver of sunlight cutting through a broken shutter. The walls were red too, but not painted, stained. In the corner stood an old iron bed frame, half collapsed. A tattered quilt clung to it, darkened in places that hadn't faded with time. Lena gagged and covered her mouth. "We shouldn't be here." Ryan stepped inside, drawn forward despite himself. The floor felt soft under his shoes, spongy in some spots. He knelt near the bed and saw deep gouges in the wood, like claw marks dragged toward the door. In one corner, a small metal bucket sat filled with a dark crust that looked almost black in the dim light. He was about to stand when the door slammed behind him. Lena screamed from the other side. Ryan turned, yanking at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The air grew heavier, thicker, like the room itself was breathing again. He could hear it all around him. Slow, steady inhalations that made the walls pulse slightly in the weak light. "Ryan," Lena shouted. "I'm trying," he yelled back, twisting the knob. His hand slipped on the cold metal. Then he froze. The sound had changed. It wasn't just breathing anymore, it was whispering. It was soft, just under the edge of hearing, but the words seemed to curl into his ears. They weren't in any language he knew, yet somehow he understood the meaning. Hunger, pain, stay. He slammed his shoulder against the door. The wood shuddered but held. The whispers rose to a moan that made his teeth ache. The smell of iron filled his lungs. He grabbed the lamp, swung it at the handle, and finally the door gave. He stumbled out, dragging Lena away from the doorway. The house trembled as they ran down the stairs, a deep groan echoing through the floorboards like something waking up. They didn't stop until they burst out into the yard. Lena turned back once, eyes wide. "The window," she said. Ryan followed her gaze. The upstairs window of the red room was open now, the curtain fluttering like a hand waving them goodbye. They didn't go back for their things. They drove out of San Marcos that night, all the way to New Braunfels before they stopped. Ryan swore he could still smell iron on his skin, no matter how many times he washed. Weeks later, a friend texted him a link to a local news article. It said an old house on the east side had been torn down after squatters reported strange activity. During demolition, workers found human remains sealed inside one of the upstairs walls, bones wrapped in a red quilt, teeth marks embedded in the wood around them. The article ended with a line that made Ryan's stomach twist. Authorities believe the victim may have been trapped inside the room and tried to claw their way out. Ryan deleted the message without replying. That night he woke around 3 again. The air in the motel room was still and dark. He lay there, heart pounding, until he realized what had woken him. From the far corner of the room came a sound so faint he almost thought he imagined it. Slow, steady breathing. On the far western edge of Abilene, where Highway 277 fades into dry pastures and crumbling motels. There's a small road called Hollow Creek Lane. It winds through mesquite and barbed wire, then just ends, as if the county lost interest in paving it any farther. That's where the schoolteacher's house sits, or rather what's left of it. The windows are gone, the boards are gray, and the porch sags as if tired of holding itself up. People in town still remember who lived there, Miss Evelyn Cross. She taught 4th grade at Hollow Creek Elementary until 1972, when she vanished one morning before school. Her car was found parked behind the house, her coffee half finished on the table. There was no sign of a struggle, no forced entry, just an open back door and a faint smell of chalk in the air. 50 years later, a man named Derek stumbled across the place. He wasn't a ghost hunter or urban explorer, just a traveler with a camper hitched to his truck, driving west toward the mountains. He'd stopped in Abilene for gas and mentioned to the clerk that he needed a quiet spot to park overnight. The woman behind the counter laughed softly and said, "If you don't mind ghosts, Hollow Creek's got plenty of quiet." She meant it as a joke, but Derek took it seriously. He liked quiet, and he didn't believe in ghosts. The road was empty when he turned onto it. The sunset behind him lit the sky in rusty colors that made the land look scorched. He found the house without meaning to. It just appeared between 2 clusters of cedar, a shadow against the dying light. The front steps creaked under his boots. He shone his flashlight inside and saw a kitchen table, overturned chairs, and stacks of yellowed papers fluttering in the draft. The air smelled faintly of mildew and something old like chalk dust and dry books. He parked the camper beside the house and set up his small propane stove. It was a still night. No crickets, no wind, just the hollow quiet of a place that had forgotten sound. He made coffee, sat under the porch awning, and watched the stars appear. Around midnight, he crawled into the camper, unrolled his sleeping bag, and left the window cracked to let in the cool air. Sometime after 2, he woke to a soft tapping on the glass. At first, he thought it was a tree branch, but there were no trees close enough. The sound stopped. He rolled over and drifted back to sleep. At dawn, something startled him awake. It wasn't noise exactly, it was the tone of a voice. Soft, clear, and close. A woman's voice. "Good morning, class," she said. Derek sat up fast, hitting his head on the camper ceiling. The window was pale with morning light. He heard papers rustling outside, footsteps crossing the porch boards, then the voice again, steady and calm. "Let's take attendance." He froze. The tone was gentle but formal, the way teachers used to sound in old films. He waited, heart thudding as the voice began calling names. "Annie, Ben, Clara?" There was a pause after each, as if waiting for answers. "David, Emma?" Another pause. "Frederick, Helen?" The cadence continued, echoing faintly across the dry field. He could hear her walking, heels tapping softly on wood, moving from one spot to another. "Ivy, James." He swallowed hard and forced himself to look through the window. The porch was empty. Sunlight caught on the warped boards, glinting through the broken railing, but the voice carried on, drifting in through the thin air, almost kind, almost soothing. "Kenneth, Laura?" "Matthew?" It reached his name before he realized it. "Derek?" He felt every muscle seize. He hadn't moved or spoken since waking, yet somehow the voice knew he was there. She paused, and for the first time her tone shifted. It wasn't warm anymore. "Absent," she whispered. The air turned colder, sharp enough to sting his throat. He grabbed his jacket and stumbled out of the camper. The porch was empty, but the door to the house stood open, moving slightly in the breeze. From inside came the faint sound of chalk on a board, a rhythmic scrape and pause, scrape and pause. He stepped closer and saw the faint white outline of letters appearing on the cracked wall beside the doorway. Not chalkboard, but plaster. The marks formed slowly, almost neatly. Present. He backed away, but the letters didn't stop. They repeated one after another, the same word over and over, carved slightly deeper each time. He turned and ran for the truck, his boots crunching on the gravel. The engine coughed once, twice, then roared to life. He didn't look back until he was half a mile down the road. The house was smaller now, framed in the rearview mirror, but he could still see movement. Thin, flickering shadows shifting behind the windows. It looked like a classroom full of children sitting perfectly still. He reached Abilene just after sunrise, pulled into a diner, and tried to convince himself he'd dreamed it. But when he looked down at his hands, there was a smear of white dust across his fingers, fine as chalk. The waitress brought his coffee and asked if he was all right. He nodded, but his voice came out hoarse. Just drove past Hollow Creek. Her face went pale. You stayed there? He didn't answer. She hesitated, then said quietly, My mother had Miss Cross for 4th grade. Said she was the kindest person you'd ever meet. They never found her, you know. But every year on the first day of school, someone finds a roll call sheet nailed to the old door. Fresh ink, same handwriting. She always marked one name last, right at the bottom. The sheriff says it's just kids messing around. Derek asked, Whose name? The woman hesitated, eyes fixed on the coffee pot. Whoever stayed there that year. He paid and left without finishing breakfast. He didn't go back to his camper right away, not even to collect it. When he finally returned that evening, the truck still parked by the abandoned house, the paper was already there, nailed neatly to the porch beam. He tore it down with shaking hands. The list of names looked faint, as if written long ago, but the bottom line was fresh. The ink hadn't dried yet. Derek, present. He dropped the paper and drove off, not stopping until the road disappeared into open desert. But that night, when he parked at a rest stop outside Sweetwater, he swore he heard her voice again, faint through the dry wind. Good morning, class. And somewhere near the window, a pencil scraped softly, crossing one more name from the list. A man named Derek spent most of his working life chasing oil rigs across West Texas. He'd been everywhere from Pecos to Monahans, sleeping in motels that stank of bleach and diesel, and sometimes in the back of his own truck when the per diem ran out. So when he got the job repairing a line near Odessa, he was just grateful to have a roof. The company had leased an old clapboard house once used by oil workers back in the 70s, a low single-story structure surrounded by sand and mesquite. It stood miles from any other property, its windows clouded with grit and its porch sagging like it had been tired for years. The company called it a temporary base, though that made Derek laugh. It was just 4 rooms with an old stove and a single functional bathroom. Still, after long shifts in the field, he didn't mind it. The house was dry. The air conditioning worked sometimes, and the place didn't smell too bad once he'd burned through a few scented candles he bought at Walmart. He slept on an old cot in the main room, a patched-up thing under a ceiling yellowed by years of cigarette smoke and oil dust. That first night, the wind came strong off the plains. The whole house trembled as it always did, the walls creaking, the roof snapping. He lay there listening to the wind rake against the metal siding, watching the flickering shadows of the mesquite branches through the window. Then his eyes drifted upward and fixed on the plaster ceiling. The ceiling was old, patched and uneven, with stains that looked like continents. There were odd patterns in the plaster, swirls, ridges, cracks forming irregular lines that caught the faint glow from his lamp. As he watched, his tired mind traced them like roads on a map. There was something almost hypnotic about the shapes, as if someone had tried to sculpt faces or figures in the plaster. He thought of the men who might have lived there before him, maybe bored, drunk, or lonely enough to scratch patterns into the ceiling with a knife or a nail. He drifted off around midnight. When he woke again, it was still dark, but the air felt heavier. He lay on his side for a while before realizing what had woken him, a faint scratching sound. At first he thought it was the wind or maybe a rat in the walls, but it seemed to come from above him. He turned onto his back and stared upward. The shadows danced again in the lamplight, but the plaster looked different now. The cracks seemed deeper, the lines darker, and though the house was still, he could have sworn one of the ridges moved, just a twitch like something shifting beneath a blanket. He sat up, rubbed his eyes, and looked again. Nothing. The air conditioner had cut off, leaving only the hum of the distant oil pumps outside. After a minute, he convinced himself it was his imagination and went back to sleep. The next day at work, Derek barely thought of it. He spent the day crawling along pipes, checking welds, and soaking in sweat. When he got back, he made himself a can of chili and sat out on the porch with a beer. The sunset over the plains was red and thick with dust, the horizon shimmering in heat. The stillness of it all gave him a strange peace. But when he went back inside, the air felt cooler than before. Not cold exactly, but damp, the kind of chill that crawls into the bones. That night, the scratching returned, softer this time, slower. He stared up again, trying to locate it. The noise wasn't random anymore, and it had rhythm. A drag, a pause, a faint scrape. He turned on his flashlight and shone it at the ceiling. The plaster gleamed under the beam, showing all its uneven scars. For a moment, everything was still. Then he saw movement, subtle, deliberate. The raised ridges of plaster began to ripple, just slightly like muscle twitching under skin. He scrambled up, heart pounding, and dragged his cot a few feet away. Dust drifted down from above where he'd been lying. He kept the flashlight aimed upward, waiting for another sign of movement, but it stopped. The ceiling returned to stillness, its cracks and stains exactly as before. He stood there for a long time, breathing hard, before switching off the light and sitting on the porch until dawn. Over the next few days, the pattern continued. Every night the ceiling stirred when the house went quiet. Sometimes it made faint whispering noises too, like air moving through thin pipes. One night he climbed onto a chair to get a closer look. The plaster looked strange up close, thick, textured, almost waxy. It wasn't like normal drywall. It felt slightly warm to the touch, like skin warmed by the sun. He withdrew his hand quickly. There were faint indentations near the center, like finger marks pressed into clay. He leaned closer and saw something darker inside one of the cracks, something that looked almost like a vein. He went into town the next morning and bought a paint scraper and a bucket of plaster mix, figuring he'd patch it up. The hardware store clerk mentioned the house used to be part of an old drilling site back in the 60s. A lot of those places got shut down, the clerk said. That one, I think someone died there. Ceiling collapsed or gas leak, something like that. That night, Derek decided to fix it. He set a lantern on the floor and started scraping. The old plaster came away in clumps, crumbling under the blade. But underneath it wasn't wood or drywall, and it was darker, moist. He scraped again and the surface pulsed. He froze. Then the entire ceiling shuddered. A low groaning sound rolling through the house like something breathing. He stumbled back, dropping the scraper. The lantern flickered, throwing wild shadows across the room. The ceiling above him was no longer still. The patterns began to writhe openly now, twisting into shapes that almost looked like limbs pressing from underneath. A pale, slick surface bulged outward, splitting a crack wide open. From it oozed a dark, tar-like liquid that dripped to the floor in slow drops. He ran to the door, but it refused to open. The knob turned, but the latch stayed locked tight. Behind him came a wet tearing sound. He turned just long enough to see something pushing its way through the plaster. Not an animal, not anything he could name. It was flat and glistening, its movements like muscles sliding under translucent skin. It spread across the ceiling, stretching its length until it covered nearly the entire surface. Then in the dim flicker of the lantern, dozens of small holes appeared across it. Each one opened like a mouth and began to whisper. The voices were faint, layered as if echoing from deep underground. They said his name first, a dry chorus repeating it in unison. Then came words he couldn't make out, mumbled, broken, but filled with pleading. He stumbled back against the wall, hands over his ears, but the whispers were inside his head now. The air reeked of rot and iron. The lantern went out. He woke at dawn, lying on the floor, covered in plaster dust. The ceiling was still. The cracks looked dry again, harmless. The lantern was cold. His tools were scattered, the scraper bent. For a moment he thought it might have been a dream, but then he saw the footprints in the dust. Small, bare prints circling his cot and leading up the wall to the ceiling. He packed his things by noon. By sundown, he was driving east, not caring about the job or his paycheck. When he reached Midland, he called the company to tell them the house was unsafe, that the structure was shifting. He didn't mention the rest. A few weeks later, another worker stayed there. He lasted 2 nights before leaving. He told the foreman he couldn't sleep. The ceiling kept moving, and once, while half asleep, he felt something touch his face. The foreman shrugged it off. He said the house had always been that way. The plaster was old, the wind strong. But when they finally went back to check, they found the cot still in the same place, covered in fine gray dust. The ceiling above it had caved in, leaving a hole big enough to see the joists. Only there were no joists, just a hollow cavity stretching between the beams, lined with something that looked disturbingly like flesh. The foreman sealed the house that day, but some nights, the workers nearby swear they can still hear the wind carry whispers from that direction, faint and rhythmic, as if something beneath the plaster is still crawling, waiting for someone to lie beneath it again. On a cold night near Mason, a drifter named Caleb was walking along a winding county road that followed the Llano River. His old army jacket barely held back the wind, and his boots were slick with red clay from the rain earlier that evening. He had been walking for hours, thumb out, hoping a trucker or rancher might stop. But the road was empty. swallowed by darkness and the occasional scatter of lightning behind distant hills. When he finally saw the faint outline of a stone house up the rise, smoke curling from a crooked chimney, he thought it must be a rancher's place, maybe someone kind enough to let him sleep dry for a night. He crossed the barbed wire fence, careful not to snag his pack, and trudged up the incline. The stones of the house were pale gray, almost glowing under the lightning flashes, and the windows were dark except for a faint orange flicker that pulsed like a heartbeat. When he reached the door, he knocked once. No answer. He waited, then tried again. Still nothing. The wind whistled low through the chimney, and the smell of burning oak drifted out. He hesitated, then pushed the door open. Inside was warmer than he expected. The air smelled of wood smoke, damp wool, and something faintly sweet, maybe apples or herbs. The fire in the hearth was low but steady, casting soft light across a small room with old furniture and a woven rug worn thin in the middle. A rocking chair sat near the fire, unmoving. On a side table rested a cracked teacup half full of something dark. No one was there. Caleb called out softly, "Hello? Anyone home?" The only answer was the pop of the firewood and the distant drip of rain from the eaves. He set his pack down and closed the door behind him. The sound of the latch made the silence feel heavier. There was an old cot pushed against the far wall, covered with a thin quilt. He ran his hand along the back of the rocking chair. The wood was smooth and warm, like someone had been sitting there just minutes ago. He told himself someone probably stepped out for water or firewood. He waited, but no footsteps came. Eventually, exhaustion won out. He unzipped his jacket, spread it over the cot, and stretched out. The warmth of the fire lulled him. He thought he'd stay just for an hour, maybe thank whoever owned the place in the morning. His eyes closed to the sound of the wind pressing against the windows. He woke later to the crackle of the fire and the faint sound of humming. Not from the wind, it was too steady, too human. The fire had grown stronger, logs burning higher now, though he didn't remember adding any. He lifted his head, blinking. Someone was sitting in the rocking chair. An old woman, small and thin, wrapped in a dark shawl. Her back was to him. Her head bowed slightly toward the fire. The chair creaked gently with her slow rocking, and the tune she hummed was low and mournful, like a lullaby that had lost its words long ago. Caleb sat up slowly and cleared his throat. "Ma'am, sorry, I didn't mean to intrude. I was just passing through and..." She didn't turn. The humming didn't stop. The rhythm of the rocking continued, steady as a heartbeat. He tried again, louder this time. "Ma'am, I knocked earlier. Thought nobody was home." Nothing. Just the hum and the fire. His voice sounded too loud in the small room. He swung his legs off the cot and stood, careful not to startle her. "If you want me to leave, I can go. Just say the word." The rocking slowed, then stopped. The air changed, heavier, quieter. He waited, holding his breath. The woman's head tilted slightly toward him, just enough for him to see a glint of her eye in the firelight. It was pale and cloudy, like the moon through smoke. He took a step back. "You okay, ma'am?" She didn't answer. Then slowly the chair began to rock again, though her feet never touched the floor. A cold wave ran through him. The sound wasn't wood creaking. It was something deeper, like bones shifting under strain. The fire flared higher, lighting the corners of the room, and for the first time he saw the rest of it. The walls covered in framed photographs, all of them black and white, all showing the same woman at different ages, always near the same fireplace, always beside that same chair. He stepped closer to one picture. The glass was cracked, but through it he saw something strange. In every photo, no matter the year or setting, a shadow stood behind her. Always by the hearth, always taller than her, its shape just barely human. He turned back to the fire. The chair was empty. The old woman was standing now, or rather something shaped like her. She was near the fireplace, her shawl hanging loose over a frame that seemed thinner than bone. Her face wasn't clear in the flicker, like the flames bent around it. Her mouth opened slightly and a dry whisper came out, scraping the air. "It's cold tonight." Caleb couldn't move. "Yes, ma'am," he managed. "It is." She stepped closer to the fire, her hands stretched out, skin gray in the glow. "They said they'd come back." But the river rose. He swallowed hard. "Who did?" Her head turned slow and stiff. "My boys, the flood took them. Mason washed away that year. The house stayed. I stayed." Her voice cracked like old timber. "You shouldn't have come." The fire roared suddenly, flames leaping as though fed by wind, but there was none. The air burned hot and cold at once. He grabbed his pack, but when he turned toward the door, it wasn't there. The wall was unbroken stone, no doorway at all. He spun around. The window was gone too, the whole room shifting as though the stone itself was alive, pulsing. The woman's shadow stretched long across the floor, touching his boots. He stumbled backward until his legs hit the cot. The humming returned, closer now, coming from everywhere. He shouted, "Please, I didn't mean to." The air pressed in on him, thick with smoke that didn't sting his eyes but filled his lungs with heat. The shadow moved up the wall, rising behind her like a second body. Then everything went black. When he woke again, dawn was seeping through cracks in the roof. The fire was dead, just a pile of gray ash. The chair was empty still. The photos were gone from the walls. He was lying on the cold floor, not on the cot. His jacket smelled of smoke. When he found the door again, it was hanging off its hinges, the wood swollen from rain. He stepped outside, gasping for air. The morning was quiet, the fog thick over the fields. When he turned to look back at the house, his stomach dropped. It wasn't whole anymore. The roof was half collapsed, the chimney broken, and the hearth, the same one he'd seen burning, was just a black pit lined with soot. No sign of life, no smoke, just ruin. He staggered down the hill, legs shaking, trying to find the road. When he reached the fence line, a rusted sign leaned against the post. It was nearly unreadable under the moss, but he could make out the faint letters. Caldwell Home, abandoned after flood of 1913. He froze. His breath turned white in the air. Behind him, up at the house, a thin wisp of smoke began to curl again from the broken chimney, too dark for morning mist. And through the fog, faint and steady, came the sound of humming. Late in September, when the air over Kerrville still carried the faint sweetness of summer but the nights had begun to cool, a man named Ray Mendez took a contract to help restore an old ranch house off State Highway 16. The job was supposed to last 2 weeks, just long enough to patch the roof, replace the flooring in the front parlor, and tear out the warped kitchen cabinets. It wasn't a big job, and Ray didn't mind staying overnight on site. He was used to roughing it, used to the quiet of long Texas nights broken only by the sound of crickets and the occasional coyote. The owner, some out-of-state buyer flipping the place, had no problem letting him crash there. Ray brought a sleeping bag, a lantern, a small cooler of beer, and figured he'd make a little camp inside the dusty house. The first day went smoothly enough. The place was old but sturdy, built in the 1920s from limestone and cedar. Furniture still lingered where previous owners had left it. Heavy oak pieces dulled with dust, a settee with clawed legs, a long table scarred with knife marks. Someone had cared about it once. When Ray swept the dust from the mantel, he found an old ceramic horse and a framed photo of a boy in a cowboy hat. He thought about tossing the photo out but decided to leave it. The room felt too empty without something on the mantel, and besides, it gave the place a little character. He unrolled his sleeping bag in what must have been the main room, the one with the big bay window facing the dry pasture. At sunset, he sat outside with a beer and watched the light fade over the rolling hills. It was beautiful in that lonely, unsettling way Texas countryside can be. Too quiet, too still, the kind of silence that makes you hear your own heartbeat. By 10, he was in his sleeping bag. The air smelled faintly of cedar and old plaster. Somewhere outside, a barn owl screeched, then nothing but the creak of wood settling. He was almost asleep when he noticed the outline of the furniture in the pale moonlight. The sofa, the table, the old chairs, all just vague shapes, unmoving. When he woke sometime later, maybe around 1 in the morning, something felt wrong. The air had gone cold. He sat up and blinked. The sofa wasn't where it had been. It had been against the far wall, but now it sat at an angle, half blocking the bay window. The chairs had moved too, grouped around the fireplace as if someone had been sitting there having a conversation. He rubbed his eyes, thinking maybe he'd remembered wrong, but no. The scrape marks in the dust told the truth. The furniture had moved. He got up, heart thudding, and checked the doors. Both front and back were locked. No footprints but his own. He told himself it must have been the shifting floorboards, the uneven ground. The house had settled weirdly, maybe made the pieces lean or slide. He didn't believe it, not really, but it was the only explanation that didn't make him want to pack up and drive into town. He moved everything back, trying to ignore the prickling on the back of his neck, and lay down again. He kept the lantern on this time. Its yellow light painted soft shadows across the room. Eventually, sleep took him again. When he woke the second time, just before dawn, the lantern had gone out. He sat up and froze. Every piece of furniture was different again. The sofa now faced him directly, close enough he could almost touch it from his sleeping bag. The chairs were in a row behind it, and the table stood tilted against the wall like someone had shoved it there in a hurry. The air smelled faintly of dust and something else, something sour, like old sweat or mildew. Ray stood slowly, his breath clouding in front of him even though it wasn't cold outside. He backed toward the door, turned the handle, it stuck for a moment, then gave. The early light outside looked pale and unreal. He stepped out onto the porch and stayed there listening. The house was still. Too still. When he came back that morning to keep working, he almost laughed at himself. Everything looked normal in daylight. Maybe he'd been dreaming. Maybe the beer and exhaustion had messed with his head. He tore up floorboards all day, and by late afternoon he'd convinced himself the night had just been one of those half-waking hallucinations that happen when you're too tired to tell dream from reality. But when dusk came, and the sky turned violet behind the mesquite trees, the thought of sleeping there again made his stomach twist. He told himself he'd stay one more night, just one. He wanted to prove to himself he wasn't spooked by an empty house. That night the wind picked up, rattling the loose panes. He lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind moan through the gaps. The furniture sat silent in the gloom. He watched the outlines until his eyes watered. Then without realizing it, he drifted off. The sound that woke him was a dragging noise, low and deliberate, like wood scraping over wood. His eyes snapped open. The lantern was still burning faintly, and he saw movement across the room. The table was shifting an inch at a time, jerking its way toward the center. Then one of the chairs followed, pivoting slightly as if an unseen hand had turned it. The sofa creaked, slid an inch closer to his sleeping bag. He didn't move. Couldn't. The sound went on for maybe a full minute, then stopped. The air was heavy with the smell of dust and something faintly electric like static. The silence afterward was worse than the noise. Finally, Ray whispered, "Who's there?" His voice sounded too small in the big room. Nothing answered. He forced himself to reach for the lantern, lifted it high. The furniture was perfectly still again. No sign of what he'd just seen. His pulse hammered so hard he thought he might pass out. He stayed sitting up until morning, never once closing his eyes. The next day he packed up to leave. No amount of money was worth another night there. But when he went to load his truck, the keys were gone. He tore through every tool bag, every pocket. Nothing, he cursed, convinced he must have dropped them somewhere inside. He went back in. The house was quiet, the air stale. The sunlight filtered through warped blinds and thin golden bars. He searched the whole place, room by room, until he found himself back in the front parlor. The keys sat neatly on the mantel beneath the photo of the boy in the cowboy hat. He didn't remember putting them there. For a long moment he just stared. Something about the photo looked different. The boy's eyes weren't looking straight ahead anymore. They were turned slightly to the side, as if watching something outside the frame. Ray snatched his keys and bolted. He didn't stop until he was halfway back to town. He tried to tell himself it had been stress, exhaustion, maybe carbon monoxide leaking from somewhere. But he couldn't shake the memory of the furniture moving in the lantern light. 2 days later, he heard from the property owner that another worker had taken over the job. Out of curiosity, Ray drove by one afternoon. The truck was there, but no one was outside. He honked, waited, then left. The next morning, he read in the paper that a man had been found dead at that same ranch house. The article didn't say how, just that he'd apparently died in his sleep. The sheriff said there was no sign of foul play. Ray went out to the property one last time that evening. He shouldn't have, but something in him needed to see it again, to make sure it was real. The house looked quiet, sunken deeper into its own shadow. Through the window, he could see the parlor. The furniture was arranged in a circle now, every chair facing inward. In the middle of that circle, something small and dark sat on the floor, something that looked like a bundle of old fabric or maybe a coat. But as the light shifted, he realized it wasn't a coat. It was the body of the new worker sitting upright, head bowed like a child waiting for punishment. Ray stumbled back, heart thudding, and ran to his truck. When he looked one last time through the windshield, the furniture had changed again. The chairs were facing the window now, all of them lined up neatly as if watching him drive away. He never went back. Months later, when the property finally sold, the new owner tried to have the place cleared. The movers refused to finish the job. They said every time they set a piece of furniture down, it would be in a different spot when they turned around. The sheriff stopped by to check it out himself and said he didn't see anything unusual, though he admitted the layout of the room felt off. The photo on the mantel was still there. Nobody had taken it down, but the boy wasn't alone in the picture anymore. Behind him, barely visible, was a faint figure of a man, tall with the kind of posture that suggested he was sitting very still, watching. A storm rolled through the hill country that night, heavy enough to make the Blanco River climb its banks and swallow the low-lying pastures near Wimberley. The sound of the rain was like gravel thrown against the windshield, relentless, hissing, and alive. The couple, Aaron and Leah, were supposed to have made it to San Marcos before dark, but a washed-out bridge and a dead GPS left them following back roads that were quickly turning to rivers. When their car gave out on a flooded curve, they could barely see beyond the beam of their headlights. Then Leah spotted the house. It leaned against the rise of a small hill, half collapsed, its frame twisted and eaten by years of storms. What remained of its roof shone faintly under the flashes of lightning, a skeletal silhouette against the tree line. They trudged up the incline, soaked and shivering, shoes heavy with mud. The front porch tilted inward and the door hung off one hinge. Aaron pushed it open and the sound it made, a slow groaning creak, echoed through the empty rooms. Inside smelled of rot and wet wood. The floorboards sagged under their steps and the wallpaper had bubbled and peeled away like old skin. There was no power, no furniture except for a single chair by the window and what might have once been a kitchen table lying on its side. Still, it was shelter. They spread out a blanket from the car, lit the emergency lantern and tried to settle in. The storm pounded harder, wind shrieking through cracks in the walls. Water dripped steadily from a spot in the ceiling, tapping against a rusted tin plate on the floor. They had barely begun to warm up when they heard it, the faintest cry so soft they almost mistook it for wind. Leah sat up. Aaron froze, lantern light trembling across the walls. It came again, clearer this time, the unmistakable sound of a child's voice calling, "Mama." The word carried through the rain, distant and fragile, like it came from down near the floodplain. Leah's eyes met Aaron's. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. He nodded. They went to the window, but the world outside was nothing but black trees and the glimmer of water rising over the grass. Aaron stepped onto the porch, lantern in hand. The rain hit his face in sharp, cold needles. "Hello?" he called. The voice answered, closer now, but still unseen. It was the same small voice filled with pleading. "Mama, come get me." It seemed to drift along the wind, moving from one direction to another. Aaron shouted that they were coming, but Leah grabbed his arm, pulling him back. "It's probably just someone lost. We can't go in that," she said. But even she looked uneasy. The sound didn't fade with the rain or thunder. It moved as if circling the house. Hours passed, or maybe only one. The storm blurred everything into a restless haze. Every time they thought the voice had stopped, it would rise again, softer from another part of the property. At one point, it sounded like it came from just beyond the back window. Leah turned toward the sound, her heart hammering, and saw the shape of something small standing at the edge of the floodlight's reach. For a split second, she thought she saw a child, barefoot, wearing something white, hair plastered to its face. But the next flash of lightning showed nothing there. She didn't tell Aaron at first. She just moved closer to him, clutching the blanket. The rain had started to slow, but the river below the hill had grown louder, churning and carrying what looked like branches or debris. The smell of silt and decay drifted in through the cracks. Then again the voice came. This time it wasn't pleading. It sounded angry or scared. "Mama, it's cold," it cried. "Why won't you help me?" The sound was too clear, too real, as if the speaker stood right outside the door. Aaron grabbed the lantern again and went to look. Leah begged him not to open it, but he did anyway, and the storm seemed to pause for one impossible moment. The yard was empty. Water glistened where the grass had been. The voice came again, this time from far away, somewhere near the trees that marked the edge of the floodplain. He thought he saw something moving between them, a pale blur darting deeper into the darkness. He wanted to follow but stopped himself. When he turned back, Leah was staring at him with wide, terrified eyes. Behind her, the chair by the window was rocking gently on its own. Neither of them slept. They stayed awake through the night, listening to the wind howl through the house and the distant voice call again and again, always just far enough to lure but never close enough to find. By dawn, the rain had stopped. The light through the fog was thin and gray. Aaron stepped outside first. The land was drowned, the road completely gone under a brown sheet of water. Down near the floodplain, where the trees bent low and debris piled against the trunks, he saw something that made him stop breathing. Half buried in the mud was a wooden swing, still tied to a broken post. Next to it, barely visible beneath layers of dirt, was a small pink shoe. He called Leah out, but she stayed on the porch, shaking her head, saying she wanted to leave. They couldn't, though. The car was trapped halfway down the hill in the mud. So they waited for the sun to climb higher, hoping someone would come down the flooded road. That's when they heard it again, faint and drawn out, the word almost swallowed by the distance. Mama. It came from beyond the river this time, farther away than before. Leah turned pale. It's moving, she whispered. It's following the water. Aaron didn't respond. He was staring at the swing, the way it rocked gently in the still air. He went back inside, grabbed his jacket and said he'd go down and look, but Leah refused to let him. They argued quiet and sharp, both too afraid to raise their voices. In the end, he stayed. Around noon, the floodwaters began to recede, revealing more of the land below. The pink shoe was gone. The swing lay still. When rescuers finally arrived that evening, they said the house wasn't safe and that the couple was lucky to have made it through the night. One of the men, an older local with sunburned skin and a drawl as slow as the river itself, asked where they'd taken shelter. When Aaron pointed toward the hill, the man frowned. You stayed there? That old Miller place washed out in the flood of '87. Little girl died there. Family moved off soon after. They say sometimes folks still hear her calling when the river gets high. Aaron and Leah didn't answer. The man shrugged, said it was just local talk, and led them back to the trucks. As they drove away, Leah looked through the window toward the house. The last light of the storm day hit the broken roof and the warped porch. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw movement again. A small figure standing just where the floodplain began, hair dripping, one arm raised in a slow, uncertain wave. The road turned, trees blocked the view, and it was gone. Weeks later, when the river had settled and the mud hardened to cracked clay, Aaron went back. He told Leah he just needed to see it in daylight, to convince himself there was nothing there. The air was still heavy with the smell of rot. The swing was gone entirely, carried off by the current. Near the edge of the property, half buried in silt, he found something small and plastic. It was a baby doll, its face worn smooth by water, its eyes missing. He picked it up and set it on a fence post before leaving. That night back at home, they tried not to talk about it. But as they lay in bed, windows opened to the soft sound of rain starting up again. Leah's eyes shot open. From somewhere outside, faint and distant, carried on the wind, came a child's voice calling softly through the dark. Mama. The house stood on the edge of Terlingua, half swallowed by desert dust and silence. From the road, it looked like every other forgotten structure in that part of West Texas. Sun-bleached boards, cracked windows, and a rusted windmill that creaked like an old hinge in the wind. But to Clara, it was perfect. She had come down from Austin to photograph the ruins of old mining towns, to capture what the desert left behind. She didn't believe in ghosts. She believed in texture and light, in the way decay told stories without words. That afternoon, the sun had been hard and merciless, and the heat shimmered like a mirage. She parked her Jeep near a dry creek bed, slung her camera around her neck, and stepped into the house. The air inside was cooler, heavy with the smell of dust and wood rot. Faded wallpaper peeled like dry skin. A few pieces of furniture remained. An overturned chair, a cracked mirror, and a mantel thick with soot. It was on that mantel that she first saw the photograph. It was framed in brass, blackened around the edges. The glass was intact, which was surprising considering how much else had fallen apart. Inside the frame was an old family portrait, a man, woman, and 2 small children. The image was sepia-toned, the kind that looked hand-colored with the faintest touch of pink on the girl's dress and a little gold on the boy's buttons. The father had a sharp jaw, the mother a stern mouth that didn't quite smile. The children stared dead ahead, eyes pale and empty. It was haunting in that old-fashioned way, but it made sense to be there. People had lived here once. Clara brushed dust from the frame and took a photo of the photo. adjusting her exposure to catch the way light cut through the broken blinds. She explored the rest of the house. 2 rooms, a kitchen and a collapsed porch out back. The floorboards moaned beneath her boots. She shot everything. The patterns in the wallpaper, a tin can on the sill, the desert creeping in through a hole in the wall. When she came back to the front room, the light had shifted. The photograph seemed to catch more of it now. She lifted her camera again, but something made her stop. The picture had changed. The man's face wasn't the same. His expression had softened, or no, not softened exactly. It had turned toward her. The angle of his head was different, his eyes sharper, like he was looking at the camera itself. Clara blinked hard and leaned closer. Maybe it was the glare or the dust she'd brushed away, but the longer she stared, the more she was sure. The man had turned his head. She took a step back and laughed under her breath. She was alone, she reminded herself. Just her, the wind, and her imagination. The heat was probably playing tricks on her. She took another photo of it, just to see later if the angle had changed. She decided to pack up before the sun went down. Driving back through the desert after dark was a bad idea. But when she turned to leave, a noise came from behind her. A soft click like a camera shutter. She froze. The air was still. No wind, no sound. She turned back slowly, scanning the room. Nothing moved. The camera hung dead on her chest. Her heart thudded once hard, but she forced herself to walk to the door. As she passed the mantel, she glanced at the photograph again. The mother's head was now turned too. Both the man and woman were looking right at her. She didn't remember taking another breath until she was back outside. The sky was bruised with sunset. She told herself it didn't matter. Just a trick of light, maybe even a prank by some local who'd tampered with it. She'd review her shots later and laugh about it. But even as she drove back to her Airbnb, her hands trembled on the wheel. She couldn't shake the feeling that she hadn't left that house completely alone, that something had followed her. That night, she uploaded her photos to her laptop. Most were perfect, the texture of the wood, the eerie stillness of the rooms. When she reached the sequence of the photograph on the mantel, she frowned. In the first image, the family looked as they had originally, posed unmoving. In the second, the father's head had turned slightly toward her. In the third, both parents looked straight at the camera. She leaned closer to the screen, noticing something else. The children. In the first 2 shots, they were still in front, holding hands. In the third, the boy was gone. Just the little girl remained, staring at the camera with eyes that seemed much darker now. Clara felt a thin thread of panic wind through her chest. She flipped through her memory card to make sure nothing was corrupted. Everything else looked fine. Just those few shots. She closed her laptop and tried to sleep, telling herself she'd been editing too long. But sometime after midnight, her phone screen lit up. It wasn't a call, not a message, just a notification that her camera had synced new files. Her breath caught. The camera was in her bag. She hadn't touched it since she got back. She opened the folder. There was a single new image, time-stamped 20 minutes ago. It was the same family photo, but now all 4 of them were standing outside the house. And in the background, through the cracked window, she could see herself inside, bending over the mantel. Her chest went cold. She dropped the phone, scrambled for the light switch, and turned on every lamp in the room. Her camera bag sat by the door, closed tight. She forced herself to unzip it. The camera screen was on, glowing faintly. When she lifted it, the battery icon blinked red, but it was recording video. She pressed play. The feed showed the empty house again, the mantel, the wall, the doorway. Then a figure stepped slowly into frame. It was her, or someone wearing her clothes, walking toward the mantel. The fake Clara looked down, lifted the photograph, and smiled. Then the feed cut off. Clara didn't sleep that night. At dawn, she packed up and drove back to the old house, telling herself she'd find the trick. Maybe someone had rigged it. Maybe there were hidden cameras. The air was sharp with dust when she stepped through the doorway again. The room was exactly as she'd left it, except the mantel was bare. The photograph was gone. She searched the floor, behind the furniture, under the debris. Nothing. Then she noticed a faint trail of footprints in the dust, small, barefoot, leading toward the back door. She followed them outside. They went a few feet past the porch and stopped abruptly, as if whoever made them had simply vanished. She stood there, breathing in the silence. Then something inside the house shifted, the sound of wood creaking under weight. She turned. Through the doorway, she could see the mantel again. The photograph was back. Only this time there were 5 people in the picture. The man, the woman, the 2 children, and a 5th figure standing slightly apart. Her hair was tied back. She wore jeans and a camera strap around her neck. Clara stared until her vision blurred. She raised her own camera and took one final picture. When the shutter clicked, she felt something move in the air like a sigh against her ear. Then her knees buckled and she dropped the camera. When she woke up, it was dark. The house was empty again. Her camera was gone. She stumbled outside, disoriented, and drove until the sun rose behind her. She didn't look back. Weeks later, a hiker passing through Terlingua came across her Jeep parked near the same house, empty and covered in dust. Inside the house, on the mantel, sat a framed photograph. It showed a man, a woman, 2 children, and a young photographer smiling faintly beside them. The house sat a mile off 79 where the wind burned dry across Archer County, and the hills rolled like old knuckles under mesquite. I'd been running a line of inspections on decommissioned cell sites from Henrietta down toward Archer City and Megargel, chasing a paycheck and a storm. Blue Norther, the radio had called it. And by sundown, the sky drew itself into that bruised color that warns you not to be dumb. The road bucked with caliche patches and a tumbleweed cartwheeled past like it had someplace better to be. I was alone, except for tools in the truck. A thermos of coffee gone metallic and the feeling you get when a county turns its head and watches you come in like an uninvited guest. When the first slush of sleet hit the windshield and the wipers scraped like a dull blade, I eased off on an unmarked farm road that cut through a stand of cedars and found the house I'd seen the last 2 trips through here. Locals called it the church house, you could tell why. The siding was clapboard, weathered to the blonde gray of long bones. A shallow porch ran the front, and the roof tilted like a hat knocked wrong in a fight. 30 yards beyond it hunched a white church with its windows boarded, the steeple iron lean and empty where a bell should have hung. Between the two was a wind-scalloped flat of winter grass and the remains of a playground, with a seesaw like a broken rib. I told myself I was only waiting out the ice. I told myself I didn't want to die upside down in a ditch. The door was swollen, but the latch had given up sometime during the Obama years by the look of it. I pushed into a smell that made me think of mouse nests and hymnals. You can smell paper when it has been close to prayer for a long time. The living room was a parlor, really, furnished by absence. There were rectangles of less faded wall where pictures had been, the ghost frames of families who never thought they'd leave Archer County or this life. A coat tree leaned with a single wire hanger twirling in the draft. In the corner, a stack of shoeboxes had given way to collapse and spilled a drift of church bulletins, yellowed and powdery soft, each stamped with a date that marched back into the 70s. The newest face on paper was a man in a dark suit with a haircut no one wears now, smiling like he'd been told to. The bulletin welcomed all to Sunday worship at 9 and evening service at 6. Parsonage supper night, it said in small type along the bottom. Bring a covered dish. I spread my sleeping bag on the floor against the interior wall and set my little LED lantern on a crate beside it. The sleet ticked the windows like dry rice. I texted my supervisor a pin drop and got back a thumbs up and a warning about roads glazing over near Holiday. No hotels in Archer City unless you count the ghost of the bookstore where the writer used to hold court, and I wasn't driving to Wichita Falls in a glaze. I shut off the lantern and lay in the dark, listening to the storm find every loose bit of this place. The rafters creaked like someone shifting their weight on them. Wind tried the door in little polite tests, then in a longer pull, then gave up with a sigh that ran through the seams of the house. I've slept in worse places. The trick is to let your mind land on something solid. I counted the breaths I could hear. Mine. The wind breathing through a crack. The house old houses breathe, you tell yourself. Because to tell yourself anything else is to be a child again in a room where the closet door is slightly open. The first sound came not as a voice, but as a shape of notes. If you've ever stood in a church foyer and held a door cracked and listened to the congregation sing, you know that sound before it becomes words. I felt it before I admitted it. The way you feel a bass line through your chest when an old truck idles down the street, humming or a chord trying itself out in the next room. The parlor's walls had been painted the color of diluted milk, and the paint was sloughing off in thin curls. I lifted my head. The notes threaded in from the kitchen, or what had been one. There was a pine table in there with a checked oilcloth hardened into a brittle sculpture. A cast iron skillet hung on a nail beside an empty hook where something like a bell pull had once been. The notes settled into a melody every Texas kid who went to old funerals would know, and I almost said the name of it in my head before catching myself, as if even thinking it would invite it. I told myself it was the wind working some gap that had just the right diameter to sing like a bottle. But the sound wasn't a single pitch. It was many laid soft as shutters closing, soprano and alto and a baritone that could have belonged to a man with that haircut in the bulletin. I hadn't eaten since a gas station in Jacksboro. Maybe low blood sugar makes harmonies out of weather, I thought. Maybe I wanted to hear voices because I was alone, and human beings will summon company out of any long silence. The house had a hallway that ran like a nave down the center, bedroom doors on both sides, and at the end of it a bathroom with a clawfoot tub listing to one side. I told the room I was going to check things out, because you talk to yourself when you want to prove you aren't scared. The floorboards answered me in their own language. In the first bedroom, someone had left a dresser with its drawers jammed, and a roll of wallpaper unspooling a pattern of tiny rosemary sprigs. There was a spot on the floor where a cradle might have stood. In the next, a bed frame stripped to slats and a window that looked out on the church. I stood there a while and watched sleet make small explosions against the boarded glass. The note swelled behind me and then died. I took 2 steps backward toward the hall and felt something give under my boot. I looked down and saw a leather-bound notebook that had been tucked under the bed, as if someone had shoved it there in a hurry. The paper crackled when I opened it. The first page had a name in careful penmanship, Reverend Nathaniel E. Keene, Circuit Log. The dates ran from 1939 to 1972, the last entry smudged and spare. He recorded visits like weather. Tuesday, Mrs. Albright requests prayer. Thursday, returned from hospital in Baylor County. Sunday, attendance 74. The word attendance had a tired dignity to it, the way some men say grace. June of 1972, he wrote. Hymn chosen by deacons for next 4 months. Then August came and there were no lines. Only a brown stain that had spread from the bottom edge like some old coffee had found its way there and made a blooming rosette. There was one more page, nearly blank except for a sentence written at a tilt like the writer had been standing. If voices stopped before the final verse, do not leave a body in the house. The words had been written hard enough to cut. I traced them with my eyes and told myself Reverend Keene died at 90 in a chair with a quilt over his knees, because the alternative lifted its head in the room. When I came back to the parlor, the sound rose again, stronger now and unmistakable. I didn't hear words, I avoided them. The way you avert your eyes from an accident, but I knew what they were singing. Knew how the second verse slows to make room for a certain humility. I don't sing, I'm not that guy. But the music pulled at the part of me that remembers my mother singing while she folded towels. The soft rustle of a job done in the presence of something kinder than the world. I stood and listened and told myself maybe the church had a radio in it. Someone had left on an AM gospel station years ago, and the static and storm were conspiring to make sense of it. Then a voice joined in from right beside my ear. It was as intimate as a breath, as if someone had leaned toward me with the practiced courtesy of an old choir partner sharing a hymnal. I jerked, spun, lifted the lantern, and the room jumped with it. I was alone. My breath smoked in the air and another breath braided with it. So close the hair in my ear moved. The note the breath found wasn't a melody note at first. It was a harmony line chosen by someone who had sung this many times. Someone who knew how to fit under a stranger's pitch and make it sound like a single thing. The voice was neither male nor female at first. It was the exact sound of help. I said out loud that I was a traveler and meant no harm and would be gone in the morning. The harmony eased closer until I could feel the shape of a cheek that wasn't there press against the space near my temple. The voices out of the kitchen carried on, a congregation polite but stubborn, and the one at my ear waited for me to choose. I don't sing, I said again, but my throat had loosened without my decision and I found myself humming the way a man hums to check a busted fan belt. The moment I did, the air at my ear warmed and the voice became clearer. It was a woman then, young if youth can be heard in a certain tremor. Your part, she said without words, but my bones heard it. Your part is needed. Every note I made was taken and laid into the other voices with a sure hand. The house seemed to stand taller around us and the wind became an organ's breath. For a short time I believed this was kindness. You can be hungry for it and not know until it offers to split a biscuit and scoot the butter your way. The hymn reached the verse that never failed to pull the old men upright in the pews, and the voice at my ear pressed close. The edge of my vision darkened, not like fainting, like curtains drawn from the sides. A pressure worked along my jaw hinge and behind my eyes. The harmony pushed into me as if it had been rehearsing this, while the house waited through summers so hot the nails floated out of the studs, and winters so mean the cedar cracked. My tongue moved to shape words I had not chosen. The voices in the kitchen held in a long, expectant chord that had the weight of obedience. I stepped backward and my heel knocked the crate where my lantern sat. It wobbled, fell, and rolled light across the ceiling. For 1 second I saw it. The shadow that shouldn't have been there. Not a human shape exactly. The negative of one. The place where a person would stand if given permission. Tall as a man who had spoken from a pulpit and bent at the shoulder, the way a woman bends to braid a child's hair. A crowd of smaller absences gathered near the doorway, each one holding the shape of a folded paper program in the middle of their chest. The shadow closest to me lifted its knot hand and I felt my own rays mirror perfect. The voice at my ear began to sing a counter line that asked a question you don't hear with the parts of you that talk. The last verse arrived. All my life, when a song I don't want catches me in a grocery store aisle or at a little league game where some dad thought he was being traditional, I walk away before the last verse. Maybe superstition, maybe avoidance. In this house, the last verse did not belong to us the way the others had. The congregation in the kitchen began to thin, not in sound but in substance, like the room had opened its windows to a tide going out. The voice at my ear tightened. I realized then why Reverend Keene had carved those words into the page. If the voices stop before the final verse, do not leave a body in the house. He wasn't writing poetry. He was writing instructions you only write when you have failed to keep them. I made for the door because there are decisions you don't think about if you want to keep your right to make decisions. The hallway had lengthened in a way old houses do when you are a boy, and the basement light is behind you and you understand the problem of distance for the first time. The door at the far end of the hall was not the door I'd entered. It wore a new face, a panel sunk inward into a shape I recognized from the church beyond. A sanctuary door with a stained ring where people's hands had pressed for 40 years. The voices cut off, not like a record lifted, but like a throat pinched shut. The sudden quiet was a blow. The voice at my ear did not cut off. It had me. It hummed into me and waited. I could feel the shape of a smile near my cheek that was not cruel because cruelty would have admitted motive. This was function. The click of a latch fitting true. The people-shaped absences in the kitchen doorway turned in unison. And I couldn't see their faces because there were no faces to see. But I felt the attention of 90 years of Sundays slide over me like a shawl. I ran. You can run in a sleeping bag if your fear is designing you a body. I got through the hall and shouldered the parlor door with a sound like timber upset from a log truck. I fell out onto the porch and into a night full of the bright sound of sleet. My boots went out from under me and I landed on the steps with a shock that bounced my teeth. The wind hit me and my lungs took in the air the way a man fresh out of a long-held room drinks water. The voice at my ear kept singing in a tone so quiet you could mistake it for your own blood. The church's steeple looked like a finger laid against the lip of the sky, asking for quiet. And the prairie answered by being what it always is, big enough to swallow any request. I made it to the truck and yanked the door and fell into the seat and jammed the key home. The engine turned, coughed, shook once, and settled into a defeated idle that was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. When I pulled away, the truck's tires hesitated on ice and then found gravel, and I took the turn too wide and shot little stones at the empty playground. I didn't look back. I have seen things that live in the rear view and learned not to feed them. By the time I found the highway, my hands were trembling with the kind of shakes that don't stop when the danger does. The radio cut on, an old unit that never did that before. Static filled the cab, warm and close. Under it rode the shape of a song so familiar, I could have driven the road blind and still made every turn on the rhythm of it. I hit the radio with my palm and the static went quiet, and the cab filled with the sound of my own breathing. Another breath matched it, a quarter step behind. A choir partner who would never be late now that it had found me. I rolled down the window and let in air bright with ice, and for a minute the cold cleansed everything, and the other breath fled. I rolled the window up and it came back with the temper of a cat that has been gently insulted. In the next town, a man at the gas station asked what part of the country I was from because I sounded like his uncle from Comanche, and I realized my voice had taken on a roundness that wasn't mine. When I said thank you, Another voice said it with me, right at my ear, partnered perfectly, training me without malice, shaping my mouth. It did not leave when I crossed the county line. I thought of all the places I could head where hymns don't mean anything and churches are framed for weddings and nothing else. And the thought shriveled like a bug in salt. I do my work alone. I don't have a woman waiting or a dog that considers me a planet. There is a kind of person who makes an excellent host. You don't know you're a spare room until someone moves into you and sets a lamp on the table and hums. And you realize the shape of your life was carved to fit a guest. Over the next week, as I finished my inspections and logged each dead site and watched the weather straighten, I found myself humming without choosing. In line for coffee and Graham behind a rancher in a down vest. In a motel shower in Throckmorton. Walking the catwalk of a tower that hadn't carried a signal since the last election cycle. People began to harmonize with me. They didn't mean to. You watch a stranger hum and something in you tries it on. Because singing is catching like yawns and feelings. More than once, the barista looked startled after she handed me my cup, as if she had spoken a word she didn't choose. Late one afternoon on a dirt road west of Archer City, I rolled past a small cemetery fenced in pipe and barbed wire. A plastic bouquet had caught and fluttered like a handkerchief. I pulled over without intending to. I went in and found a stone near the back where the mesquite scratched the sky. The name was Keene. The dates fit the years. Someone had left a smooth river rock on top of the headstone. A sign I'd seen somewhere of a visit. A pact. A memory that chooses to be heavy. The breath at my ear was very still, as if it were resting after a long walk. You tell yourself you'll be rid of it if you starve it. You stop humming. You avert your head when the radio in the diner plays something that has lived in this country for 150 years. But the problem isn't songs. The problem is the mechanism inside you that songs use. I drove back past the church house 10 days later because I told myself I needed to prove something I didn't have the words for. The sky was high and clean and full of the sound of meadowlarks. The church wore its boarded windows as before. The house had one new thing. The bell pull had been restored in the kitchen doorway. You could see it from the porch if you stood just right. A length of pale rope, clean as bleached bone. A single tug would send no sound into the air because there was no bell to ring. But the rope didn't care about bells. It cared about hands that would pull when asked. I stood there with my truck idling, and the voice at my ear quiet as snowfall. I remembered the instruction written at a slant, the one I should have read out loud like a man reading the rules before he tries to wire his own breaker box. If the voices stop before the final verse, do not leave a body in the house. There had been a body once, or the warning wouldn't exist. A preacher who believed in order. A flock who trusted a tune to keep them together when fields were bad and wells went sour. A single verse interrupted by lightning or a birth or a death, and the air left full of what wanted finishing. Some rooms can't abide unfinished work. They will find a body in which to do it. I didn't go in. I didn't need to. The wind shifted out of the north and the rope stirred and lifted as if a hand had given it a small approving try. In the far pasture, a windmill turned lazy. When I pulled away, a sound settled into my truck's cab I will carry until I am done carrying anything. It was faint and patient and content to wait in the soft part between breath and word. When you hear me humming in line behind you, don't worry. I won't ask you to sing. You'll do that on your own. You'll hear a note you didn't know belonged to you, and you'll answer it very softly at first, and then with the confidence of someone who grew up in a good place with Sunday suppers, and a preacher who remembered your name. You'll feel something warm at your ear that isn't a whisper or a threat, but a presence arranging you into your part. There is no need to fear the last verse. It almost never comes. The song goes on because the house is still there, and the church and the meadowlarks and the wind from the blue norther. One day, when the weather turns and the sky takes on that color that taught you to make up your mind, you will be driving past Archer County, and you will see a house that looks like it has been expecting you. You will say you are only waiting out the ice. You will tell yourself you don't sing, and then a voice will join in from right beside your ear, and you will find that you have been carrying the first note your whole life without ever knowing what it was for. We said we weren't going to split up, but that promise dissolved the way all promises do after midnight, soft around the edges, easy to tear. The four of us had parked off a county road outside Waxahachie where the red dirt turns into powder. If you scuff it with your boot and the wind carries cedar and something sweet from the fields. The house people online called the Bishop place wasn't on any map we trusted. but locals mentioned a hill and a gate with a star cut from plate steel. And there it was, half fallen, braced by chinaberry trees and muscadine vines that had crawled right into the windows like fingers. Its porch sagged, and the gables had that Eastlake kind of fretwork that Waxahachie does better than most towns. Gingerbread scrolling that made the place look fancier than its bones deserved. We had the usual kit, headlamps, a thermal camera. Because Kyle swore the last time he got a cold spot to show on video, his channel jumped 1,000 subs and a bag of cheap LED lanterns with dead bugs already trapped inside their plastic covers. There were stories about a cotton man who built it in the 1890s when the trains made money fall like rain. Stories about his daughter who sang in a church choir and never married because she was waiting for a man who drowned in the Trinity. And stories about the way the place never took to electricity, no matter how many wires they strung. The power company cut the line after a fire, according to an elderly mechanic in town who leaned over the counter and told us we were wasting our youth on nonsense. He had the clean hands of a man who tells other people what's wrong with their cars. He said the house had a way with doors. "You think you know a house by where it lets you go," he said, and then grinned without any warmth. We climbed the porch. The floorboards had that dry music under weight, little groans that rose up when you shifted. I filmed the dusty glass in the front door, beveled so the reflection cut my face into pieces, and I saw my own headlamp beam jump as if someone else had jostled me. The others pushed in, and the smell of mouse nests and rain-wet lumber hit like a memory from attic summers. The staircase rose out of the entry, turned at a landing with a stained glass window that showed a red rose, and then vanished into a darkness that swallowed light, even with our lamp slicing it into pale slices. Wallpaper hung in curling tongues. A shadow of an old square piano in the parlor hunched against a wall, keys gone, hammers like teeth, lid cracked. The kitchen had a sink with a pump handle and a field mouse's stiff body under a colander. Everything was ordinary in that way. Abandoned places are, as if you walked into a camp after the soldiers went and the wind was the only person left. We were an hour in when the house began to have opinions. Eli called from the back hall that a door was jammed, so Kyle came with the pry bar. The door gave with a bark, and the smell changed again. Old iron and damp cloth. We found a closet full of clothes that had melted into themselves, black wool coats, a dress with little glass buttons that scattered like hail when I brushed them. In the bedroom with the bay window, I found a tuft of hair caught in a nail and told myself it belonged to a raccoon. No one wanted to climb to the 3rd floor. The stairs there were narrow and the heat had collected like breath. We agreed that we would set a couple of lanterns at the landing and a camera to catch any movement, and then we would camp in the entry, safe as it gets, with a quick block to the front door if a deputy rolled up to run us off. Night walked in without asking. The county road went quiet the way it does when the last trucker takes his thermos and the coyotes move in the ditch grass, and in that hush, the house spoke in little ticks and sighs. We took turns narrating into the camera telling the story we wanted to tell, about the choir girl and electricity and the way doors made choices. Kyle tried a spirit box and got some AM station out of Corsicana, and a station ID for a preacher whose voice had too much molasses in it to sound like a living man. Eli laughed and turned his headlamp off and on to mimic the stutter of the old lights. We ate 2 gas station burritos that had welded themselves to their wrappers and a sleeve of peanut butter crackers. Somewhere around 2, the air got heavy. You felt it first on your tongue. The dust had weight. My breath had to shove to get in. I lay on my sleeping pad and listened to the wind in the elms and thought about the Trinity River moving slow under the bridges east of town, black as if the water were made of used motor oil. And I thought about the choir girl singing to No One, and the way Waxahachie's courthouse has faces carved on it that stare like witnesses who can't testify. We slept in a ragged way, the way kids sleep in a tent, one ear pricked, one hand already reaching for the zipper. I woke to Eli sitting up and saying he had to piss and he was going to use the back door. I smelled rain that hadn't happened. I heard someone moving upstairs and told myself it was a raccoon. Kyle took a selfie with his face half lit and his mouth half open like surprise was a good expression for the thumbnail. I fell into a deeper pocket of sleep, where you can hear yourself breathe and believe you are in charge of it. And in that place I had the idea I was being cataloged. The house was taking inventory. Shoe size, The way my left shoulder clicked when I rolled, the scar on my shin from barbed wire, the shape of my sleep. I woke hard before dawn, the blue hour when the birds are still thinking about it and the fields are a wash of slate. The light through the stained glass rose was ash gray. The room had changed. It took a second before I knew what my eyes were telling me. On the wall opposite the staircase, where there had been nothing but peeled wallpaper and a print of a ship sailing on a blue ocean, a door stood open. Not just unlocked, open. The kind of open that is an announcement. It had a cast iron latch, ornate, and the wood was a darker, richer tone than the rest of the house, as if it had been oiled while everything else had been drying out for years. The opening showed a set of steps that went down into a square of darkness that ate the beam from my lamp and asked for more. No one had mentioned a basement, and we would have seen the door. We had filmed this wall 3 times for cutaways. I know because I checked the preview thumbnails still saved on my phone. Nothing. A stretch of wall with water stains shaped like maps of countries I had never visited, the little ship print, the faint shadow outline of a bookcase that had been moved years ago. Now a door, open, with cool air moving out of it and into my nose and mouth like a tasting. Once I noticed the temperature, I noticed the sound, a quiet wafting, like cloth rubbing against wood, like breath across the mouth of a bottle. Eli woke, with a snort, and then stopped with his mouth open, staring. Kyle stood, pulled his hat on tighter, and grinned like it was exactly what he had ordered. Mara cursed softly and got her gimbal and her big lamp. We felt that sensible fear that comes when a thing changes the rules of time in front of you. We looked at the opening and at each other and thought of floors above us that would groan if we moved wrong, and of the county road where the sun would find the dust, and of the way people sometimes walk into a hole they can't climb back out of because the hole liked their name. We left, the way you leave a church when someone begins to speak in a voice that is not quite theirs. No one ran. Running felt like a word the house could use. We went down the porch. The boards did not argue. The red dirt took our steps and did not show them. The sun had come up in a way you could point at. The road lay like a ribbon no one had pulled tight. We reached the car and we did not speak until the seatbelts were clicked and the doors were closed, and the house was a shape in the mirror that grew smaller and more complicated as it retreated. I said I did not want to ever go back. Kyle said he would pull stills and do a rough cut that evening, and then we could decide whether to publish. Mara asked if we had noticed that the stained glass rose was darker. Eli said he had counted the treads on the main stairs when we first came in, and there had been 13 to the landing. But when we came out, he counted 14 without meaning to, and that kind of difference made him itch. Some places leave when you do. This place did not. At home, I put my gear on the table and took the batteries out of everything the way a person unloads a gun, before he admits there was danger. The house stayed in my head like a tune. When I closed my eyes, I saw the ship in the print, closer to shore, sails bellied. A storm behind it that had developed new texture across the face of it like a bruise. The rope lay coiled with such perfect courtesy that I could not bear to touch it. I showered, and that feeling of being inventoried came back with the water beating on my neck. The house had handled me the way a tailor handles fabric, measuring the stretch, the give, how it lays when it is draped. That night I woke at the blue time again. The street outside had that particular quiet of 4 a.m. when even the highway sulks. My apartment is not old. Drywall and vinyl siding, the cheapest fixtures. But the air had shifted a degree. The shadow where the bedroom door stands had a harder edge, as if cut and moved 1 inch. I lay still and watched the blank of the ceiling. My phone face down on the nightstand bloomed light with a message from Kyle. No text, just a thumbnail of a video. I opened it and the sound rolled out. A low rubbing, breath across a bottle. The image showed the lower entry, our lower entry, empty. It showed the table and the chair and the door, and then the camera moved as if someone had picked it up and turned it slowly to look up the stairs. On the landing, the stained glass rose was black. Not dirty, not soot-stained. Black like a pupil. The video ended with the lens rising as if to meet a face leaning down from the top of the frame, and then a glitch pattern I could feel in my teeth. I texted him to stop. I said to pull the plug and put the files in a zipped folder and burn it if he had to. He wrote back that he had already tried to delete the footage, and his system reported that the files were open in another application. He had turned everything off. The files were still open somewhere. He sent a photo of his monitor. 2 clips listed with a little lock icon beside them. Open by a process called door. That was not a process that computers run. He asked if I heard it. Before I could ask what he meant, the sound rolled through my apartment, not from the phone. It came from the wall that shares with the hallway outside my unit, from the place where the baseboard has separated an inch and I have been meaning to tell the landlord. A breath across an empty bottle, patient, testing. I stood and walked toward it like a man in someone else's dream, and the shadow of the door on the wall shifted that inch again, as if whatever cast the shadow had leaned closer. I did not go to the wall. I did not put my ear to it. I stood at a distance and began to say my own name under my breath the way you say a mantra, as if I could hold myself in place with syllables. The sound from the wall paused. That was worse than hearing it. It was listening. I turned all my lights on and sat at my table with the rope. I did not touch it. It lay there without dust on it, as if polished. The end had been laid back into itself in a little hitch that sailors call a respectable finish. Something you do when you're proud of your work and you want a thing tidy the next time you pick it up. In the morning, I drove back out, against every decision I had made, because there are choices you have to stare at to see the shape. I told myself I was going to make sure the door we had not noticed was closed. The fields were clean and the rows cut low. Waxahachie's steeples pricked the sky and the courthouse's tight faces stared with that carved patience that has nothing to do with mercy. The county road lay quiet and the gate with the star leaned the same way and the vines had not moved, and the house sat where we had left it with its porch sighing. The front door yawned. My footprint from last time matched 100 others that had dried and flaked. The entry smelled like damp wood and mouse and rain that would never reach the ground. I told myself I would look and then leave. I told myself I would not touch anything I did not have to. The door on the wall was closed. I felt relief like a physical thing. A wash through me that made my knees think about bending. The iron latch hung in a position that meant nothing had moved it. The air near it was cold in that deliberate way that makes you think of a hand on your face. I stood and watched it for longer than I will admit, waiting for something to declare itself, some math to resolve. The stained glass rose on the landing window had more black than color. I went to the front door and put my hand on it, and the wood felt alive the way a tree feels alive in winter. Asleep but listening, I told myself that my name was my own, that a house was lumber and nails and stories, and that if a door had to be noticed before it existed, then all we had to do was not notice it again, the way you do with a child's trick. I told myself a lot of kind things. I got back in my car and drove away. The mirror made the house smaller, and the smaller it got, the more wrong it looked, as if proportion is immoral and the house had failed it. That should be the end. The part where the camera cuts and we publish and people in the comments argue about how we faked the lower entry and whether the rope was unlaid by magnets. But the story keeps its own time. A week later, after nights of hearing breath where walls meet floors and seeing my bedroom shadow door shift an inch at dawn and finding, on the rug by my bed, grit like red dirt from Ellis County, I woke to a change I had been expecting. The apartment felt hollowed. The air was a shade heavier. In the hallway wall where the baseboard lifts, a seam had widened. The paint had split along a vertical line no wider than my palm. The line had hinges, 3 places where the paint had stretched in rounded ovals. They bulged like knuckles. We said we wouldn't split up. I'm telling you now, I am alone in this part. The others have stopped answering texts one by one. Not dramatically, not with goodbyes, but the way a radio station fades when you drive out of its range. Kyle's last message to the group was a thumbnail of that black rose, and then nothing. Mara posted a photo of a door frame with the caption, "Nothing is centered anymore," and then her account went private. Eli sent me a voice memo that began with him whispering he thought his mother's pantry was deeper than it had ever been, and ended with a drawn-out breath like cloth against wood. I have wedged a chair against the seam in my wall. I have duct-taped the baseboard. I have told myself the sentence the mechanic gave me. You think you know a house by where it lets you go. The seam in the paint breathes. If I stand close, I can feel the air pull at the hair on my wrists. The hinges are patient. They do not care that I have named them. This morning I pressed my palm to the cold and felt a palm press back exactly, like 2 people, through glass, promising, without words, to meet halfway. When I sit at my table, I can see a sliver of darkness at the edge of the seam where the paint has pulled themselves apart. And in the darkness there is a suggestion of stairs, not drawn, not imagined. Steps with rises and runs and a little sway as if the house has learned to breathe through them. I do not close my eyes at dawn anymore. I do not blink when the light flattens in that particular way. The door that must be noticed has been noticed. The door I did not want has opened itself as wide as courtesy requires and no wider. Because that is worse. Courtesy asks you to meet it. Courtesy expects you to come the rest of the way. When I sleep, I dream of the lower entry, and in the dream the ship at the wall has grounded, its hull on black sand, its sails slack. The door downstairs is still on its chain. In the dream I can hear someone pacing, wearing a path by slow degrees, making a track that will eventually be a trench, then a ditch, then a gulf. I wake with red dust under my fingernails. I wash it away. It does not matter. The door keeps its own calendar. It favors dawn. It does not hurry. You might think that patience is kindness. It is not. It is appetite that has learned to wait, because it knows you will be hungry first. I said we should close it. No one moved to do it. The latch looked like a little animal ear. It would be so easy to push the door until wood met wood. Kyle said we'd come for this. It didn't matter that we had not known we had come for this. He set a lantern at the threshold and the light puddled and then rolled like water. It did not go down the stairs the way light should. It hung. That should have been enough. Instead, we made rules. Mara would stay at the top and film. Eli would hold a rope and I would go 10 steps and count each one out loud. Kyle would go behind me to 13 and no farther. If the air changed in a way that made our chest sore, we would back up and seal it and leave. We made the rules the way you make paper boats, elaborate and fragile. The first step creaked slow and sticky like something old chewing. I counted 1, 2, 3. The rope in my hand gave me more comfort than I admitted. The walls were close, too close for a real stairwell. I could feel painted wood under my fingers, not the roughness of plank or the cold of stone. It was as if the house had pushed its femurs together and made a passage with its own bones. At 5, the air smelled like iron. At 7, it smelled like rain. At 9, a cold touched my cheek as deliberate as a fingertip. I told myself it was a draft from a window below. At 10, there was no floor. There was the idea of a landing, and then there was a stop in my stomach like when an elevator jerks, and I rocked back and threw a hand out and hit wood that shouldn't have been where it was. Kyle was breathing like a runner. My own breath had turned into steam in the lamp beam. The rope went tight and then slack and then tight again. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone else had taken hold farther down, testing our knot. I swung the lamp and saw it for the first time. There was a room at the bottom. I know that sounds simple. A room with a chair and a table and a wall with a framed picture. But it was not simple. It was the entry hall above, exactly. The same grimy runner rug with a diamond pattern in the weave. The same stain shaped like a shoe. The same staircase rising and turning at a landing where a rose of colored glass should have been, but was instead a smear of dark, like a stain that had never learned color. There was a front door. My hand went numb from hanging in the cold. I realized my voice had stopped counting and tried to find it again. 10, I said. 10, and then I was out of numbers. Mara told me to hold still. Her voice came from above and below at once. The audio lagged half a breath. I saw her lamp flare in my peripheral vision, and then saw it flare again where the bottom room's ceiling should be. I was looking up into our own entry, and down into an entry that was the same but wrong. The wrongness lived in the edges, where lines should have met cleanly and instead shivered like heat over asphalt. The picture on the wall downstairs was the ship print, but in it the ship was closer to shore, the waves were higher, the sky darker. The chair had moved an inch. In rooms like this, an inch is a mile. Eli asked if I wanted to come up. My mouth said not yet. Kyle's hand came down to my shoulder like he was knighting me. The rope tugged again from below, and I thought of something that had hands it could not see. Feeling the weave, curious, I stepped down to the landing and the wood accepted me with a long sigh. If this were a video, I would be yelling at myself to leave. In life, you add one more step, because you do not want the future to be a story you were too small to finish. We crossed the threshold. The cold had texture. It lapped at my wrists. The light from our lantern found the table and did not illuminate the spaces under it, as if the corners were little pits. My own footprints did not appear on the runner, but a faint dark mark followed a path from the base of the stairs to the front door and back again, as if a person had worn a path through years of pacing. I could hear our friends speaking above us in the exact sentences they had already spoken, a half second ahead, like the house was running our night on a loop for practice. The front door downstairs had a brass plate and a keyhole too large, teeth marks in the wood near the edge. Through the mottled glass of it, I saw dawn or something like dawn. A flatter light like paper held behind paper. We tried the downstairs door. Of course we did. It opened a hand's width and stopped on a chain. I put my eye to the gap and felt a wet breath on my eyelashes. The yard outside was not our yard. The same chinaberry trees stood, but they leaned toward the house, and the gate's star was inverted and taller, and the sky was a shade of gray that made my teeth ache. Kyle asked me to narrate. He wanted the words later for editing. I said the house was layered, that there was a mirror below us that wasn't a mirror, that there was a repetition with drift. The word drift felt right. It felt like a river term. The Trinity trying to be the same river and failing with every bend. The rope in my hand grew heavier. Eli cursed. He said something was pulling him, and the words doubled, his voice and his voice's echo. Mara said she could see us and not see us. She said in her frame we were in the entry and also on stairs that didn't exist. She told us in a voice that had a new thinness that the door behind them had closed, not the new door, the front door, and the latch had given a quiet click like the end of a sentence. Kyle laughed. It was not a brave laugh. It was a man paying at a toll booth in a storm, the sound of exact change. We agreed to go back up. We agreed as if someone had made the suggestion first, as if a host had stood and thanked us for coming. I took the first step and the wood did not answer. My foot met pressure and nothing else. The stairs had turned stubborn. The rope went forward. I pulled back. It slipped. Not with a whoosh, not like a movie. The knot loosened as if a patient finger had picked at it for an hour while we were distracted, and had found the exact tug that undid the work. And then the rope was 2 ropes and then no rope at all. Just weight on my palm that fell away like a handshake ending. We did not scream. We brought our breathing down and fed our legs slow information. We measured the steps with the kind of respect you give to a wild thing that is not angry yet. At the landing, the cold leaned against my ribs. At step 5, my name came from above in Mara's voice and from below in Mara's voice, overlapping like 2 tracks. There are words that feel like hands when they touch your name. There are words that feel like ropes. These were neither. They were doors. Each syllable opened something I had kept closed. When we reached the top, the threshold had moved. It had shuffled itself 3 inches sideways. It's a foolish detail, but it cut through me. I knew the place where we had stepped into the downstairs entry was not where we were stepping back out. On the hall wall, the ship had come closer, its masts like needles, the ocean around it a tight weave. The stained glass rose in the landing window had a little more black inside the petals, like soot had breathed under the lead. We stood in our entry and looked at our gear and saw all of it a little to the left of where we remembered it. The lanterns glowed. The front door was not latched. The morning on the other side was our morning, full of a chorus of grackles and the far hum of the highway that runs toward Dallas. Mara's eyes were filled with water she would not shed. Eli ran his hands over the rope and showed us the end. It wasn't frayed. It was neatly unlaid, the 3 strands loosened, the twist reversed, the work of a bored sailor. We told ourselves we had done it. We had gone 10 steps down and come back up with our bones in the same order, and the house had not swallowed us. And it would make a good video if we put the thumbnail at the exact moment the lower entry revealed itself, and put a red circle on the wrongness. It would not matter that on the thumbnail our heads would be at gentle angles that did not match the way a head likes to sit on a neck. We could pretend we did not see it. We began to pack. The door to the basement still stood open. The air moved through it with the patience of a deep pond. Kyle said one more shot with the camera on the floor, pointing down so viewers could see the symmetry. He lay on his stomach and reached in to set the tripod. The tripod's rubber foot made no sound. He adjusted, peering, and then froze. The screen showed our sleeping pads downstairs. It showed footprints we had not made. It showed in the lower hallway a 5th pad, narrow with a knit cap folded as a pillow. The cap matched the one I kept in my pack. He swung the camera to the front door. Outside in the lower yard, 4 tracks led to the gate and back again and then around the house in a loop that grew tighter as it neared the foundation. The dirt there was darker. The trees leaned a little more. I felt my heart put my name into my blood and send it through me like a letter to the editor. I will not go down, I tell myself. I will not count the steps. I will not test the rope. I will not touch the latch. I will watch and I will catalog, and the door will tire of me and close. That is what I tell myself in the late hours. But the morning has a way of tilting the floor toward the seam, of concentrating the cold so that it seems the only place where air is clean. The house in Waxahachie is far away, but the place that wanted me to learn how it holds its bones together has taught my walls to make a mouth. If you have ever lived alone, you know the force of a hallway in the blue hour, the invitation it makes with its simple straightness. I can hear the breath waiting on the other side, patient and sure. If you come to my door, you will find the chair braced under the knob and my rent check taped to the frame because I do not want the landlord to have a reason to knock. You will not hear anything at noon. At dawn, if you listen through the drywall, you will hear a rope being worked by careful fingers undoing itself strand by strand until it is ready to reach for whatever you offer. I am telling you this because sometimes saying a thing out loud maps it on the world and keeps it from moving. That is another kind lie. The door on the wall swells when the sun finds the edge of the blinds. The room brightens and the seam darkens and the breath bleeds through and touches my teeth. I can tell you the length of the first stair by the way my body leans when I stand near it. I can tell you the depth of the next by the way my name sounds in that hollow. I will not go down, I say. The door opens one finger wider. It waits for the shape of me to fit the shape it has made. Somewhere in a house on a hill outside Waxahachie, the stained glass rose is nothing but a black coin set in lead. Somewhere a lower entry lies exactly under an upper one, wearing a path into itself. Somewhere a ship has run out of water. Somewhere a latch lifts. Somewhere my voice is already echoing, counting gently. 10 and then nothing and then more.